Settle in. Tonight we walk the Ottoman world at the pace of lamplight courtyards and fountains, shipyards and caravanserais, kitchens before dawn and libraries after dusk. A brass ladle measures oil, a ledger takes a seal, a cord makes a loop that opens before it argues. In the shade of an arcade, a calligrapher smooths a page with a burnisher until it learns to be calm. Across the Golden Horn, mallets in the yard strike wood and pause, like rain that keeps good manners. Far inland, a road lifts gently to a stone bridge, a way station lays out bowls, water, and a quiet place for who's to forget distance. We will drift from market scales to mass courtyards, from vague fountains that give water without asking names to caravan bells that count the evening, from isn't kins that remember colour to top-cap kitchens that remember measures. Taxes become lines, lines become wages, and wages become bread. Gardens keep shade, the way law keeps habit. When stories of battles pass by, they will pass like weather on the horizon here. Night belongs to tools and schedules, the small instruments that let a vast empire breathe in order. If sleep arrives, let it. The lamp will keep your place, the road will keep its line, the sea will keep its soft, persuading pull. We are only visiting quietly rooms where patience did the work. The first part. A city learns to breathe in courtyards. Dawn opens under an arcade, stone keeps yesterday's cool and gives it to the present without bargaining. In the center, a fountain waits the way a kind sentence waits for the next word. Its basin is not large, the marble rim is worn to a softened oval where wrists and copper pitchers have leaned 4 years. A brass ladle hangs from a chain, it turns once at the slightest breeze and then remembers stillness. The first footsteps are careful, not from fear, but out of respect for a floor that holds history the way a shallow bowl holds light. Water comes to the city by promises kept in sequence. Far uphill, a channel rides a contour. The builders trusted each stone lip lifts the stream just enough to ask it to continue. At the aqueduct archer keeper walks the spine and touches mortar as if it were a sleeping animal. He knows his joints by the sound they make when the heat changes. Where the water enters town, a sifter basket rests in a niche, it catches leaf and twig and returns them to a garden that never complains. The main line divides into branches like a good argument dividing into reasons, each ends where someone will drink, wash or bless. Here in the courtyard, a fountain called Ada van an ablution basin keeps the day orderly without raising its voice. Wooden shoes wait on a rack, a man steps out of leather into wood onto the stone bench. He rolls sleeves and turns the tap a small amount. The stream answers in a fine column. Hands, mouth, face, forearms, ears, measured motions that rinse sleep from the soft places where thought begins. He does not hurry. On the marble lip, a thin groove remembers thousands of the same motions. It is a line drawn by patience rather than chisel. On one side, a kiosk, the Sebel offers water to anyone with thirst and no coin. Its lattice windows hold bowls like small moons. An attendant polishes brass cups in a rhythm that calms him. He stacks them lip down, so dust will prefer the floor. A ledger sits under the counter. It holds no names of drinkers, only deliveries of wood, oil, wick, and the weight of sugar when a feast calls for sherbet. A seal on the title page shows the endowment waqf whose rents keep water moving even when memories falter. The seal is a sprig, a small lamp, and a date. It says, "This gift is a routine." Across the courtyard a colonnade keeps shade as seriously as a treasurer keeps sums. Beneath it, two bookstands lean at a careful angle. A calligrapher smooths a page with a burnisher of agate until paper grows quiet under his hand. He tests the reed pen on a scrap, cuts the nib with a small knife that knows one job, splits the slit just enough to hold ink without hoarding. The inkwell smells like gum and soot, a drop falls on a pallet tile, and he lifts it back into purpose with the tip of the reed. The first letter lands, a line that is more breath than mark, the beginning of a sentence whose most important quality is calm. When he rests, he places a sand shaker fine. Like flour on the margin, the grains fall and persuade the shine to subside. He lifts, taps, and returns the shaker to its corner. A weight of bronze, shaped like a bird asleep, keeps the sheet from wandering in the breeze that flows under the arcade. On a shelf, scrolls and codices keep company without debate. Some carry histories copied here from elsewhere, some carry law, a net of paragraphs that prefer mercy in practice, some carry lines that a singer might remember at a wedding. The calligrapher marks one scene with a thread, so he can find the place after a visitor's greeting. The visitor is the keeper of the fountain ledgers. He brings a small chest with 2 compartments, one for receipts, one for seals, and the cord that takes wax kindly. They speak softly about channels, leaks, lime, and a mason with hands that learn problems by touch. They do not talk about success, because there is no news in success. The keeper sets the chest on the bench. He opens to the page that holds the last month and adds a line, short as an exhale, describing the weight of lamb tallow to keep hinges respectful. He closes the chest with a loop that opens before it argues. Courtyards have a grammar of sound that makes sense of hours. Early on, buckets in the stable click against the trough later. The bakery across the lane knocks loaves together like old friends greeting each other. Then the loom in the workshop to doors down hums and clacks. Thread against reed in a pattern the weaver learned from his mother's patience. Toward midday, the crier announces the time with a bell the size of a big apple. The bell says the same thing every day, and nobody is sorry. Around the fountain, voices rise and fall like the hands that scoop water. Short words, no shouting. A boy comes with a stack of cups bound by a hemp cord. He unknots without haste, sets the stack into neat families, then coils the cord and slips it into his sash. A woman arrives with a clay jug wrapped in a wet cloth to teach it coolness. She fills it and ties the neck with a strip of linen. A porter with a leather backpad leans on his pole and drinks slowly. The attendant waits with a towel and a look that says the next traveler will be seen too. A cat hesitates on the fountain's edge and decides today is not the day for daring. On the far side, a shelf holds little oil lamps clay with a spout, thumb-sized reservoir, and a wick that minds its modest station. The attendant trims the wicks with nail and forefinger, then sets the lamps back in pairs. When the sun falls, he will carry 4 to the arcade's darker corner where a visitor likes to finish a page before sleep. Their light will be amber and small, and will not argue with the moon. Next to the lamps, a set of brass weights nest like bowls, 1 dirham, a half, 2, 5. A scale hangs above. Sometimes the attendant weighs sugar for sherbet on holy nights. The weights descend one by one, and the beam finds a level that reassures everyone in the room. Outside the gate, a lane wanders toward a covered market, but the courtyard keeps the edge of the world from pressing. A gardener sweeps leaves into a quiet corner where they will become patience for soil. He looks at the plane tree, its bark puzzles itself into maps and taps a nail into the wooden stake that teaches a young vine to behave. The plane's branches hold 5 small birdhouses, their holes face away from the wind. A ribbon on one of the houses marks a child's game. The ribbon fades toward a color that used to be loud. It is a friendly kind of disappearing. At the back wall, a door leads to a tiny workshop where a maker repairs pictures, lays new lead into seams, polishes old copper whose dent remembers a crowded day. He keeps a block of wood with an honest top, a hammer whose head holds values, and a handful of stakes that pretend to be curbs. His fire is small and courteous. He uses it to warm solder, just to the point of agreement, not beyond. When a neighbor brings a broken handle, he greets the pot before he greets the man. He wraps the new joint with a strand of hemp until it learns to be whole. He burns off the fuzz where flame can do that job more kindly than the blade. By the early afternoon, the courtyard softens into long shade. 2 elders sit apart, but share the same line of sight toward the fountain. One counts rosary beads, each bead a small stone in a long, quiet wall. The other studies the wet trace the ladle leaves on the marble, and supposes the trace could be a letter if anyone were writing today. Neither speaks. The city speaks enough elsewhere, and silence spends easily here. In the corner, a pigeon claps its wings once, and then remembers how to be a pigeon. On market days, a line forms without announcement. shoemakers, a porter, a pair of tanners who have washed the day from their hands, a sailor whose sleeves smell like rope, all pause in the sequence that gives the city its balance. The sailor hands his cup back with thanks and a coin to the charity box. The attendant refuses the coin with a smile and directs it to the slot that keeps lamps burning. He does not judge the sailor for misremembering the rule. He keeps a list of guests that does not include names, to baskets, one blue scarf, a man with quiet eyes, a woman who laughed before the water. The city handles festivals the way a careful cook handles spice. Tonight there will be lanterns, and Sherbet the Sebel will set out large glass bowls. Behind the lattice crushed ice will arrive from the house that keeps wintering straw high on the hill. A boy will grate the ice under a cloth to keep the sound from becoming rude. Syrup flavored with rose will flow into cups, and the weights will settle on the scale as if invited to a polite contest. An old song will collect near the gate. Its melody is a thread that knows every turn of the court. In the late afternoon, a schoolmaster sets a slate on the bench and draws a square, then another, then doubles each side. Children watch and nod. They repeat the lesson by tracing on their own slates with bits of chalk that grumble nicely. He rinses the slate in the fountain and watches the repetition disappear. The children wash their hands before leaving. They hold their cuffs back with their teeth. The teacher pretends not to notice the bite marks in the cloth because they belong to the age of learning. He dries his slate with a cloth that used to be part of a curtain. Evening arrives on the soft soles of those wooden shoes. Steps slow, voices drop. The light of the sky turns to the exact color of the stone walls, then to a gentler color the palette has no word for. The calligrapher ties his papers with a ribbon and writes one last line on a scrap. Lamps remember places. He places the scrap between two pages, so tomorrow will greet it like a familiar face. The fountains taps close one by one, with just enough pressure to say, until morning. The ladle turns once and rests. Night finds the courtyard ready to think in smaller thoughts. 3 lamps burn under the arcade, and their flames lift and resume in the small draughts that pass like considerate guests. The Sebel lattice holds the dark. If it were another liquid worth saving, somewhere far away, a drum marks the hour with confidence closer by. A coin drops in the charity chest and stays. The plane tree, whose roots drink a secret channel, keeps its leaves still enough to let the stars practice reflection in the basin. Sleep belongs to anyone who wishes to borrow it. If sleep arrives, let it. Taps will keep their threads, ladles will keep their hooks, cups will keep their rims, memory of lips, chords will keep their habit of opening seals, will keep their sprigs, the burnisher will keep its friendly weight, the reed will keep its edge, the weights will keep their hierarchy, the plane tree will keep its shade, channels will keep their slope. Courtyards are rooms where water becomes custom, and custom becomes rest. Pocket pictures to carry forward, a brass ladle turning, and then deciding to be still, a groove on marble, where ablution taught stone, a soft line lattice, windows with cups resting like moons, a seal with a sprig pressed into wax, a burnisher of agate smoothing paper to quiet a reed pen trimmed to a patient edge, a sand shaker tapping shine into good manners, brass weights nested in a family, a copper pitcher with a new handle wrapped in hemp until it trusts itself, a ribbon on a small birdhouse fading toward gentleness, a boy undoing a knot and coiling it properly, a ledger line about tallow that means hinges will not complain. If sleep arrives, let it. The Ottoman city will keep your place here, where water, shade, and writing escort the hours without asking for applause. The second part. A market is a many-sided scale that stays level because each small thing remembers its job. The alley roof is a quilt of wood, until light falls in narrow lozenges that lie on bales of cotton and pyramids of copper trays. Morning opens the shutters one by one. Hinges clear their throats. A broom draws last night into a quiet corner. An incense spoon touches a coal in a brazier near the arch, and the first thread of scent learns the ceiling and the path above the shop signs. A bell the size of a plum notes the hour, and the owl pretends it meant to arrive just then. At the spice stall, jars sit like planets, each with its own weather. Pepper keeps a dry confidence. Cumin rehearses its whisper. Saffron rests like a small sunrise behind glass. The merchant lifts a lid and stirs once with a horn spoon, not for show, for evenness. His scale hangs from a beam. To pans swing toward agreement. Brass weights wait in a nested family, round and calm, their numbers rubbed smooth by decisions. A paper cone appears from a square sheet, his thumbnail and forefinger persuade the fold into habit. A measure of cinnamon, a dot of clove he weighs, then lifts one seed back out, because exactness is the flavor that pleases him most. Opposite, the cloth man unrolls his mourning. Bolts lean in a bright company, indigo that yokes night to day, madder that remembers clay, wool that decided to be honest about warmth. His arm the yardstick, with a brass tip rests on 2 pegs. He takes it down, lays it along a selvage, and taps once. The beer counts the tap as proof. Scissors with long legs step through threads, the cup runs straight, because the cloth wanted it. He binds the roll with a cord that opens before it argues, ties with a bow that looks undecided, and is not. A seal pellet sleeps in a small tin when he presses his signet. It wakes long enough to become memory. The bread seller checks his oven by ear. The door is iron, it speaks in a low tone when heat sits properly in the wall. A paddle of poplar lifts to lows and lets their bottoms kiss. The sound is a kind of arithmetic, hollow is good, dull is not good yet. He lays the lows on a reed mat to learn coolness as a language. Beside the mat, a set of lead stamps lies in order. One shows a wheat head, one shows a ring and a sprig, one shows a simple circle that means today. He presses each stamp lightly into the warm crust. The mark says weight was respected, flour was honest, and the baker kept pace with the town's hunger. At a small table under the arch, the muhtasib, the market's soft-spoken inspector, keeps a ledger and a pair of balances that are fussy in the best way. He travels light, a ring of standard coins, a test stone that knows metal by color, a string with 11 knots for counting short events, and a stick that never pretends to be longer than it is. He chooses his moments. A weight is set down, too hard he looks up. A seller smiles, too quickly he drifts over. He does not wait to scold. He waits to watch two pans agree, then nods at the space between them as if it were a bridge worth crossing together. In the lane of leather, a man oils a strap until it remembers how to bend without complaint. Punches lie in a roll of felt with holes like small moons. He chooses one, sets it, and turns his wrist a quarter breath as he strikes. The round falls free with a sound that means clean. A buckle receives its pin, and the pin finds its seat to stitches in waxed linen. Close the question. On a shelf, patterns hang, traces of feet, a saddle flap shape, a handle template. Each pattern bears a notch that tells which way the grain prefers. The shop keeps scraps in a basket that becomes a purse when a child arrives with 3 small coins and a plan for a treasure bag. A coppersmith burnishes a tray with circles that learn to be concentric by hearing the same song for many years. He turns the tray on a wooden stake, pulls a spoon-shaped hammer in tidy arcs, and watches the metal shine decide to be a mirror that also remembers its hammering. In a shallow pan, he melts a little tin, a thought becoming agreement. He pours, tips, and pours back, leaving a skin on the inside of a cup that keeps sour from quarreling with metal. The cooling cup sits on a ring of felt and looks surprised at its calm. He stamps a small sign under the handle, where only the careful will look. In the aisle of thread, a woman winds silk from a skateboard of spools to a reel that counts without arithmetic. Her fingers walk the strands into order. A skein smooths into a hank and receives a small paper collar with a mark that means the dyer who listens. Nearby, a loom breathes, heddles up, shuttle across, beater forward. A carpet's edge grows a little meadow of knots that agree to live forever. A boy trims the faces of the palm with scissors that think in straight lines. He gathers the soft seed of wool or a bowl for stuffing pillows that will improve someone's nap 4 years. Not far from the gate, measures of volume sit like cousins. A copper oak for grain, a wooden scoop for rice, a tall tin cylinder for oil that came from hills that learned patience. Each measure has a witness mark scratched by a careful hand at a com table long ago. A beer points at the line and smiles. The seller nods, then fills just past and levels with a flat of reed in one breath. No words are needed. where water is sold a sherbet stall that sleeps by day and wakes on festival glass cups, check clarity by the simple method of returning what they hold to the eye without cloud. Coin scales say little, but say it plainly. Their arms are short, their pans are shallow, their weights are small round truths that do not argue. A money changer keeps his trays in order, silver here, copper there, a few gold pieces under the near corner for a man who just closed a season of whirring. He taps a coin once against the edge of a tile. The ring shows what the metal believes. He wipes a piece with a fold of cloth that feels older than the newcomer coin. His fingers count in families of 5, because hands prefer that. A woman trades a bracelet for a purse of change and receives a string with a knot that will undo when she asks it kindly. The guild hall at the market's bend looks like a large cupboard with ideas about friendship. Benches run along to walls, a long table sits in the middle with a cloth that forgives stains. On the shelf, a chest holds the guild's lamp, weights, seal, and a narrow book that remembers who paid dues when their mother was ill and who sent bread when the mill threw a mood. In the afternoon, masters sit, taste tea, and revise nothing about their patients. An apprentice ties a new loop, the guild cord, that seals jars and finds that is not opened politely on the first try. The master nods and does not smile, because not smiling is the way some men show deep approval. Smells keep the day moving without alarm. Bread gives way to stew, gives way to roasted chickpeas. Chickpeas give way to coffee near the caravanserai, where travelers keep quiet and cups find their saucers without needing to ask directions. A coffee man polishes his little pot until the grain of the metal stands up like a polite guest. He does not shout for customers. He heats water slowly and lets sugar be a rumor. A circle of men leans in a story out. The handle of the pot stays cool enough to be a friend. The inspector returns to his table and writes a line. Bread stamps, press scales, agreeable pepper merchant, acceptable tin lining, observe dye house quiet. He dots the final mark with a care that suggests the dot knows more than it tells. A child brings him a grape leaf with a small drop of water clinging to its edge and waits for him to notice. He notices. He tips the leaf and the drop enters his cup without scandal. He gives the leaf back to the child, who runs away looking both ways as if a moral had been offered and declined. By late afternoon, light becomes a thicker cloth and tries on the rails and rings and handles for size. Shadows line up like patient customers. The spice man closes a lid. The cloth man ties his last roll. The coppersmith lays his hammer with the head toward the stake, as if the tools should fare each other well for the night. The bread seller counts stamps back into the drawer. He sets the next day's flour tokens in a little board with holes that hold their roundness until dawn. The money changer spreads his hands over his trays for a long breath, and then gathers the coins into sacks that speak in soft weights as they go. Evening, and the market is a mouth that closes gently. Shutters slip into place, beams slide, the bolt recognizes its socket. A lamp burns in the inspector's niche while he sands the last line dry. He shakes the page lightly, the grains fall like a small, polite rain. He closes the ledger and ties it with a cord that opens before it argues. Outside, the alley learns the tune of sandals turning toward home. A cat finds the warmest stone and keeps it. Somewhere, a night seller of figs sings 3 notes that have cared for themselves since boyhood. The market believes him. Night brings the quiet arithmetic that sleep prefers. Balances weight in their hooks, weights sleep in their nested family yardsticks, shine along their brass stamps, rest in their tray like little moon seals, call cords stay looped, ready to open jars, keep their level in the dark. All the small instruments that made daytime honest now hold still and let the hours turn without their help. Honesty also sleeps, but it does not snore. If sleep arrives, let it. Scales will keep their memory of level weights, will keep their manners yardsticks, will keep their inch stamps, will keep their touch seals, will keep their sprigs coins, will keep their ring scoops, will keep their line ledgers, will keep their straight backs. Markets are schools where fairness learns to be a habit and then a kind of rest. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A paper cone persuaded into shape with a thumbnail, a brass weight lifted and set down with a finger's promise scissors, stepping through indigo that decides to behave an iron oven door answering. With the hollow truth a ring on a test stone learning its color, a tin lining pouring, then giving itself back to the cup, a carpet's edge trimmed to a whisper, a knot that opens before it argues a seal pellet, finding a sprig, a yardstick tapping once on a selvage, a drawer of bread stamps, warm to the touch, a ledger, line that ends with a dot that looks satisfied. If sleep arrives, let it. The Ottoman market will keep your place among measures and manners, in the long alley where exactness and kindness trade without words. The third part. A caravanserai wakes before the road does. Stone holes night a little longer along the arcades. The courtyard is a square of pale dust, brushed smooth where yesterday's prints have agreed to become memory. In the center, a trough reflects a small rectangle of sky. Rings are set into the walls at regular intervals. Iron that shines where ropes have practiced patience. The gate is 2 leaves of timber strapped in iron. It stands open now, like a sentence that has decided to continue. The keeper walks the perimeter with a cup of tea, whose steam prefers his beard. He taps each ring with the back of a knife. Soft sounds, all agreeable. At the corner cistern, he lowers a bucket on a chain that knows the weight of water by heart. The water rises with a polite swirl. He pours into the trough and watches silt settle the way a well-brought-up thought settles in a conversation. On a peg near the gate, a tally cord hangs with 10 knots. He unknots one and smooths it between finger and thumb. That is the count of beasts already inside. And the day has hardly begun. Camels arrive, as if the morning owed them the courtesy of going first. Their pads convince the cobbles without complaint. Each wears a wooden pack frame padded with felt that has learned both strength and forgiveness. A handler sets a bale of cloth, another of coffee, a third of dried figs. He crosses ropes in a diamond lashing that makes sense even to tired eyes. He finishes with half hitches that promise to remain promises. A thin cord around each bale ends in a little pellet of clay. The pellet receives a press from a signature leaf, a wave, a straightforward line. Clay remembers while ink travels. In the shade along the long side, a steel yard hangs from a beam. The arm carries little riders that walk toward balance. The hook takes the load and hums a note when gravity and memory meet. The scribe notes the weight on a wax tablet, reading the riders with an easy glance. He warms yesterday's lines with his palm and smooths the wax where numbers have reached the end of their usefulness. A ledger waits for the evening, for ink and clean sums, but morning belongs to wax and persuasion. From time to time he lifts a reed pen, tests its nib on a scrap, and sets it back. The day will invite ink when dust sits. The Immeret kitchen of charity breathes gently behind a low door. A pot of lentils keeps a patient simmer. A round of bread sleeps on a cloth bowls stand in a neat democracy that wants only order. A woman adds a thread of oil from a small ewer and waits until the surface shows a restrained joy. When a handler steps in with a cup, she fills it for him and nods at the door. No names are written. The ledger in the Immeret lists wood and onions, not faces. A tile near the threshold carries a seal from the waqf, the endowment that says the plot will outlast the argument, the road, and any sudden weather of coin. Tactile stories without voices. Nose pegs are smoothed by use, and respect bells are chosen for tone low for leaders. Clear for the tail straps are rubbed with tallow until they recall the shape of kindness. A young camel snorts and forgets, then remembers, then forgets again. The handler smiles without showing it, ties a short lead, and walks a small circle that suggests trust. A mule stands to one side, shod yesterday. The farrier checks each nail with the lightest hammer, strikes the sound, answers in a key that means keep going. He lifts a hoof, pairs a thin curl, sets the foot down, and pats the fetlock as if to ask the road to be courteous in return. The gatekeeper checks the latch that keeps the leaves wide and sets a short pole where it will be wanted later. On the lintel, a brass plate carries a witness line that once measured how high the flood reached in a year, that like to exaggerate. The line shines because fingers have believed in it. Outside, the first dust rises, a thin promise, nothing rude. Road stones show their crown, the ditch remembers last rain, and does not gossip about it. A boy leads a donkey with a skin of water, for the day's track the skin bows to gravity and to the idea of thirst without giving in. When the caravan master calls, he does it with a tone that is more schedule than order. A here, a there, a small hesitation for the last knot. Bells take the tune, each speaking its one syllable. The scribe lifts the tally cord and moves a knot. 11. He ties a second cord to the first a day. Is a longer count and grins at the luck of good arithmetic. At the threshold, the master and the keeper exchange a nod that counts 4 receipts and 4 goodbye. On the inner face of the gate a chalk mark from last month has been left on purpose. A thumb passes over it and leaves it a little clearer. The caravan folds itself through the opening and becomes a line. Out on the plain, distance is a polite negotiator. The track keeps to the firm ground without bragging. Markers appear where they should, low cairns with a thin flagstone laid across. A milestone worn smooth by praise. In a shallow wadi, a line of stones stands just proud of the usual flow. Someone set a little cutwater stone upstream of the biggest step, and water remembers to part around it. A pair of poplars announces a spring before the eye sees water. At the spring, a trough carved from a single block keeps one end higher, so overflow runs back, not away. A gourd on a string waits for anyone's hand. The Menzel, the day's way station, sits on a small rise where breezes arrive without ceremony. It is not a fortress, it is a promise. The gate opens into a courtyard, much like the one behind, with rings in the wall, a trough, a cistern with a chain, and rooms whose doors are more often ajar than closed. A guard sits not to scare, but to point. He has a pole, and the authority to say over there with kindness. A room holds pallets, rolled and tied. Another holds saddles upside down, to think. Another holds a brazier and a kettle black with good work. A shelf carries a few jars of lamp oil. A second shelf, the thin bowls that make any stew a feast. The Menzel scribe is cousin to the one at the caravanserai. He sets a low chest on a mat and opens it to reveal an ink cake, a small water bottle, a reed pen or 2, and the ledger. He does not ask questions that are not his to ask. He writes the number of beasts, the hour of arrival, the number and seal of the lead bale, and whether the well level caused anyone to raise an eyebrow. His letters are steady as the pole that holds the lamp. He presses a small stamp that belongs to this station, then sands the wet line lightly. The page will be dry before the pen is capped, that is as tidy as any law. Midday finds the caravan unburdened enough to breathe. Packs loosen a little bell straps, areased a handful of dates, counts the same number of minutes as the shade a wall gives. One man checks the diamond, lashing on a bale with a touch that answers questions not yet asked. Another adjusts a pad that has learned the wrong lesson from a morning of slope. A third kneels, unwinds a strip of cloth, and attends to a raw spot on his heel with a salve that smells of time and the serious idea of rest. Someone laughs once, softly, at nothing. The sound goes as far as it wants, and then decides it is done. If the day is long, a relay rider comes through, a light horse, a small case under his arm, a line of dust that minds its manners. He does not dismount. The station keeper brings a cup. The rider drinks, wipes the rim with his thumb, nods to the ledger, and trades cases with a motion that will look the same next week. He leans forward, the horse leans forward, and the trail receives them back to dots that prefer to be lines. He is the poem of messages, when all messages prefer prose. The Menzel, how the poem stays legible. Afternoon leans toward the east, and the air decides to be generous. The caravan folds back onto the track. The same bells as morning say a different thing, a promise with the sound of promises being kept. The Menzel drains and refills trough, and hears its own echo. The scribe closes the ledger and ties it with a cord that opens before it argues. In the yard, someone has left 3 brooms leaning together. One falls, another stays, the third pretends it had no opinion. A dog gets up, circles twice, and finds that the second circle was unnecessary. A lizard does exactly what lizards do. Not every day brings news. Some days are cups that remember to be cups. On those days, the track passes a ruined watchtower whose stones now keep lizards warm. The caravan passes a fig tree that has decided to be generous before its time The wind finds the bell of the tail camel and plays one syllable longer than usual. The caravan master touches his beads wooden, modest. Equiland says a line he says most days, not because it changes the world, but because it keeps his own step even. Let the road be a line between two quiets. Evening returns the caravan to a horn, not the morning's, but its cousin. The gate turns on its will. A trough fills with a thread of moon in it. A lamp learns the room where it will glow. The scribe takes his place under an arch, writes a line, and smooths the top of the wax tablet with a small, circular patience. A child runs the perimeter counting rings and loses track in favor of dust artistry no or worn minds. The pot in the imret has decided that anyone holding a bowl holds a reason to be here. Hands, ropes, bells, rings, each small instrument pauses in a position that looks like rest and is. Night turns the caravanserai into a square thought that keeps the mind company without asking for it. Camels fold their legs with the same crumpled grace they have at noon. A mule sighs a rope, relieved, remembers its straightness in sleep. The gate is drawn to, not shut. A pole rests where it belongs, somewhere outside the wall. The road continues to be a road without anyone watching. Inside, a little brass lamp behind a lattice holds the darkness like a colander sieving shadow. A drop of wax finds the rim, stops, and stays. If sleep arrives, let it. Rings will keep their circles, ropes will keep their habits, knots will keep their consent, bells will keep their toned stones, will keep their crown troughs, will keep their level ledgers, will keep their lined seals, will keep their small fate cisterns, will keep their cool gates, will keep their hinges. Caravans are moving courtyards, and courtyards are caravans that decided to sit. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A diamond lashing finishing into neat hitches, a steelyard rider slid to the mark, and resting there a wax pellet taking a sprig cleanly, a trough reflecting a useful rectangle of sky, a tally cord, with one knot smoothed, and another waiting, a relay rider's hand, not quite stopping, a cutwater stone leaning into a shy flow, a chalk marker, irrigates inner face, sharpened by a thumb, three brooms leaning together, demonstrating theories of balance, a lamp behind a pierced tin shade painting stars on a wall that prefers quiet. If sleep arrives, let it. The Ottoman road will keep your place, measured from ring to ring, from trough to trough, by the small, unremarkable agreements that turn distance into rest. The fourth part. Harbour speak a language of circles and lines, rings sunk in stone, ropes taught to remember, wakes that draw chalk on water, and then erase themselves kindly. Morning on the Golden Horn begins with a mist that chooses to be gentle. Keystones shine where last night's wash still thinks about leaving. Iron rings along the edge hold the memory of many bowlines, their inside edges are polished soft as cuffs by ropes that preferred good manners. A bollard wears a cap of pitch, the colour of plum skins. A goal lands, folds itself into patience, and becomes a punctuation mark that means soon. In the shipyard, wood leans like a choir that has already warmed its voices. Planks rest in stacks by length, and opinion ribs of a new hull stand like the page edges of a book waiting for stitches. A keel lies on blocks that know exactly how high they are. The master of the slips runs his palm along it and pauses as a knot. He marks the spots with a chalk cross that pretends to have always been there. A boy brings a pot of hot pitch that smiles without boiling. A corker lifts hemp teased from old rope command, presses it into a seam with a wooden iron, tapping in a rhythm the yard learned from him, and not the other way round. Tapping travels down the line. Another team answers with its own cadence. Mallets are small and sure, they never hurry, because hurrying makes leaks. Between taps, a man draws a thin iron hook to pull the oakum just so the hook shines where his thumb teaches it to. Pitch follows oakum. A brush moves like a calm reed in shallow water. The seam becomes a line of agreement between plank and plank. A hand lays flat against the warm tar and lifts, leaving a black print on the palm that is neither stain nor badge, only work. At the rope walk, distance is twisted into strength. A long shed longer than any room a city usually permits holds 3 hooks at the far end and 3 at the near. Boys walk backward, hands low and steady, feeding hemp into the twisting strands, become lays become a rope that will claim a name, sheet, brace, halyard, mooring line. The foreman holds a handheld gauge, a ring of wood that tells whether a line has achieved the thickness it promised. He slides it along the newborn rope if it tightens. The boys ease if it rattles. They step a little quicker. When the line is right, the foreman touches the end with a bit of warm tar and sets in a tiny whip of twine, so the rope remembers not to unthink itself. Anchors lie like sleeping dogs, painted black, where iron meets air. Their flukes learn the harbour's mud over the years and stop being surprised by it. A smith cleans a collar with a file near him. A chain link glows the colour of persimmon and dims enough to accept the hammer's idea of finality. The chain snakes across the yard and vanishes up onto a deck. A boy feeds it through a hawse hole, counting links under his breath, not because anyone asked him to, but because numbers make good neighbours to iron. A pilot coil sits on a rail, a line marked in fathoms by leather tags, one with a long slit, one with a short slit, one with a hole. Each tag a small, tactile sentence the hand can read at night. A boatman lifts the coil, pays the line over the side, and watches it kiss the water. Then sink he notes where the tag finds his fingers and nods at the bottom without ever seeing it. He coils the line back into right-handed circles, so it will fly without sulking when it is next asked. Beside him, a lead sounder with a hollow bottom waits for tallow, which it will carry down to bring up a souvenir of the harbour floor, mud, sand. Weed the harbour tells its story to those who ask politely. Sails sleep furled along lateen yards. A sailmaker crouches on a bench under a window that makes rectangles of day across his canvas. His palm is a leather disc with a brass dome that pushes a needle through hemp cloth without begging forgiveness. Seams run on the bias edges, a rope to distribute stubbornness evenly. He stitches a reef point short lengths of line tied through the sail's belly, each point knotted twice in quiet. A mark in chalk shows where the yard will take the sail's head. Another mark shows where a grommet will learn to be round forever. Thread runs out, he waxes new thread with a cake that smells like honey, thinking. At the quay, a lighter brings barrels from a storage shed whose walls have learned the smell of salt, wine, oil, and cautious promises. Shirts of wicker wrap the slippier jars. Amphora feet fit kindly into holes in planks laid across a cart. A cooper tests a barrel with a gentle rap, listening for sulks a stave, as opinions that, once heard, can be persuaded by a hoop and the right wedge placed without drama. A chalk line on the barrel head records the sort of liquid that will not want to argue with this wood. The chalk will fade, and that will be all right, other marks will stay. Signals a quiet grammar. A lantern hung at the masthead. In late afternoons the captain expects to be out past courtesy hours. Two small flags, one red, one striped, say a pilot is aboard. At different pairs, or a pilot is wanted. A board at the end of the pier carries, not words but shapes. A triangle for wind now thinks from the north. A circle for harbour mouth asks patience. A boy raises the boards in the order a keeper's list suggests. He carries each like a tray, careful not to show preference among triangles. Fish arrive when fish prefer. Nets come in like wet handwriting. A man kneels and persuades a hook out of a jaw. He scolds a gull with eyebrows and is forgiven. A woman guts with speed and an almost spiritual clarity. Scales make confetti of the air for a while and then remember gravity. A pail of sea water makes a clean line across a cutting board. The fishmonger sprinkles a handful of salt, not to cook, to teach. At the edge, a child watches eels attempting democracy in a tub and votes with laughter against their plan. Beyond the fish, a pair of boat builders lay a plank along ribs and ask it to accept its fate as a curve. Steam is the argument that wins. The plank softens in a chest, then travels to the hull in a dance involving 3 men and a dozen clamps. Iron dogs bite gently and hold. The plank calls and remembers the new shape. A line of tree nails, wooden pegs runs along the seam, a dotted promise. Inside, a scarf joint meets another with a loyal handshake. A mallet persuades with a muffled thud that thinks in inches, not drama. The day's light leans. A row of ring bolts along the quay accepts mooring lines with a small, heavy satisfaction. A bowline finds a cleat that understands the art of holding and releasing in the same breath. The first turn goes under, the second over. The figure of 8 completes a partnership. A long spring line runs aft to discourage the ship's habit of wandering. The water makes a sound under the planks that has persuaded many men to defer decisions until tomorrow. A goal changes its mind and occupies a different punctuation mark. On the far side of the yard, a chandler recounts its small mercies: boxes of wick, bundles of lamp glass wrapped in straw, tins of linseed oil, a pyramid of tiny blocks, and sheaves that will teach a rope to pull kindly. The shopkeeper keeps a ledger, like a harbour keeps a tide table. Not to be surprised so often, he writes a line to fathoms, new hawser, does 6 reef points and sands it while the customer calls his purchase into a travelling circle. A small bell on the door has learned to ring in a way that reassures rather than announces. Memory sits on a bench shaped like a thwart. Old oars, planed smooth by years of water grammar, lean in the corner and refuse to be thought of as retired. A rudder head with a repairing copper shows where iron once enjoyed an argument it did not win. A model hull, dusty, holds a little pennant that points consistently to the doorway. One asks how. An elderly pilot teaches a boy to splice. Short splice, long splice, I splice. The boy's fingers argue and then agree. The pilot says, ropes are like opinions, the difficult part is not cutting. It's weaving enough truth back in that the line will hold. A crier in a skiff slides along the quay with the tide under him, a patient animal. He calls 3 times softly, as if talking to a room where someone sleeps about the tide's next decision and the threshold under the arch at the harbour mouth. He points at the board with its triangle and circle, and is satisfied that the board points back at him. He's all locked between a pair of thole pins, knocks once, twice, a private percussion. He tips his cap to a woman sealing a jar with pitch, and she tips the brush back in greeting. Evening cures everything into shape. The yard stills. The rope walk darkens to a line where dust floats like ideas not chosen. The harbour settles into a mirror only busy enough to keep the moon interested. A watchman with a lantern takes a slow turn along the rings and bollards, touching iron with his fingers the way a man reads names on a wall he loves. He pauses at a cleat to admire a knot that is both strong and modest. He lifts the lantern so its light checks the triangles on the board. The triangles admit they have nothing new to say. Night in a harbour is a schooling impatience. Lanterns at mastheads nod to each other. A buoy clangs once in the throat, then decides against more conversation. Somewhere, a pilot line pays out, counts a tag with a hole, and comes in again. A man on a deck pinches a wick and redresses it, so the flame is short and golden. The air smells of tar learning to be tar forever. A cat remembers. It is a professional at being a cat and marks the yard from one safe place to another. The watchman writes a line. All rings quiet pitch pot extinguished sounder, put away chain called board unchanged. If sleep arrives, let it. Rings will keep their circles lines, will keep their lay knots, will keep their pledges seams, will keep their promises pitch, will keep its seal anchors, will keep their hold cleats, will keep their shape buoys, will keep their voice. Flags will keep their grammar ledgers, will keep their straightness. Harbours are cities that learn to breathe in curves and patience is the kindest sea. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A caulker's mallet tapping a seam that chooses not to leak oakum teased from old rope-like wisdom, from old talk a rope gauge sliding and then agreeing a lead line with a tallow bottom that brinks. Up honest mud a sailmaker's palm pressing a needle, through a stubborn edge a cooper's, hoop settling with a quiet sigh a cleat dressed in figure of 8 beauty, a chandlery scale balancing a block, and a length of line a boy's first. Splice holding a lantern, checking rings like an old friend. If sleep arrives, let it. The Ottoman harbour will keep your place among rings and ropes, cleats and chains, wine that learns to be a schedule, water that learns to be a road. The 5th part. Kitchens teach a city to be kind 3 times a day. Before dawn, the great kitchens along the palace wall breathe like a row of sleeping animals that know when to wake. Their chimneys rise behind a parapet in even intervals. each a patient throat with a copper cap, turned just enough to nod at the wind. Under the vaults, hearths wait with their mouths dressed in brick ash beds, hold yesterdays, grey in a neat rectangle, levelled with a board that learned to be straight. Hooks hang from iron bars, ladles hang from hooks, a chain turns a spit that has memorized slow arithmetic. The air smells of cedar smoke that decided to be courteous. A cook steps into the light from the courtyard and sets a brass weight on the scale pan. Eve greeting a reliable neighbour. Rice rustles from a jar into the other pan. Until the beam agrees, the cook lifts 2 grains out with damp fingers and smiles at the slight. He tips the rice into a rinsing bowl, the water clouds to a patient milk and is poured off, then again, then once more until it runs clear enough to show the bottom's scratches. Nearby, a copper cauldron wide-shouldered, with rings for a human hand sits on a trivet, whose legs are as confident as old soldiers. A boy lays split wood in a careful triangle, so flame will have a plan. He touches a taper to a wick steeped in tallow and offers the small fire to the bigger idea of breakfast. The spice keeper unlocks a low, thick door with a key that moves like a measured sentence. The storeroom is called because its walls were told to keep secrets and agreed. Jars live here, glazed, labelled not with words, but with marks: a clove flour, a star for anise, a little leaf for bay, a wave for salt. He lifts a jar, its lid whispers against ceramic. He pinches saffron in a fold of paper, the threads like small sunsets that have learned to be patient. He ties the paper with a thread and sets a bead of wax. The bead takes the storeroom seal, a sprig with 2 leaves and a dot. The dot means today. He smiles as if that were enough poetry for a morning. In the bread room, an oven door answers a knuckles knock in a hollow language bakers understand. The oven's floor wears a bloom of heat that a palm can feel from a respectful distance. A peel slides under discs of dough sprinkled with sesame. Their surfaces have been pricked by a comb, so steam will leave without drama. Flour lives in bins marked by a notch on the rim that means honest measure. A brass scoop enters, lifts, and levels with the edge of the bin in one practiced breath. A board holds tokens for flour rations round, square, triangular, laid out in holes like constellations. When a baker draws a token, the hole shows its shape and remembers its place until evening. Water moves like law through the kitchen wing. A channel runs along the inner wall, shallow and tiled, with gates that lift on a brass rod to admit a sheet of water that is more silk than noise. Lidded jars sit shoulder deep in a basin to learn coolness. An amphora is sunk in sand under a lattice for the same reason. To copper ewers rest on a shelf, they drip a little from their lips, because that is what honest ewers do. On a hook above the scullery sink, a bundle of time dries. It sends a polite reminder that stew is not an emergency. The fishman arrives with a pan of pale fillets and a ledger that thinks in columns and days. He lays the pan on a bench, shows the ledger, and waits. The quartermaster turns a coin on his thumbnail, listening not for ring, but for his own patience. He tests the weight of the fish, or a balance whose pans have never told a lie, sets a brass weight, then another, then moves one back with 2 fingers. He nods once. The entry is written, a number, a sign, and a dot. The dot in this book means agreed. The fishman leaves with his tray empty, his ledger light, and a cord that will open before it argues. Fire is a citizen here, never a lord. Charcoal lies in a square bed under a grill and glows from the middle outward, like a thought that has chosen its center. The grill carries lamb shoulders that have been taught to accept salt without complaint. A brush of rosemary dipped in oil murmurs along the meat and leaves a line of story behind. In a pot, lentils practice patience. A hand adds a just measure of cumin, which nods to the hot oil in a language that has nothing to do with words. A string of garlic heads hangs by the door, each skin a quiet lantern that remembers dirt in a respectful way. Knives live on a board with a shallow groove to keep their edges from dreaming in the wrong direction. A steel stands nearby like a polite teacher. A cook draws a blade along it with the same pressure he uses to close a child's book. The chopping block is end grain. It shows a map of rings that decided to work together. On the block, Parsley becomes green rain, onions become square decisions, apricots are halved by a knife that chooses grace over speed. A bowl of yogurt stands at ease in a shallow dish of water. Its surface shines like a truth that has no enemies. A ladle turns once in a pot and rests on a spoon rest made from a tile whose glaze is chipped in a pattern that resembles a flock of small birds. Between the hoods, vents pull smoke along paths chosen long ago by someone who understood that even air likes a schedule. The copper domes over the hearths have dents that were not accidents but lessons. A boy, new to the wing, runs his hand along a dent and meets a gaze that explains. Here the pot once tested its chain, here the hook learned to face the other way. He nods, and the dent becomes a story he will not tell, only remember with his hand when polishing day arrives. Beneath the outer arcade lies the dairy room, cool as a chapel without pictures. A trough of flowing water passes through shelves, stand above it holding bowls that float on their own shadows. Cheesecloth knots hang like patient bells from a rod. A woman ties a cloth, pours a ladle of yogurt into the knot, and leaves it to consider becoming another thing, slower and thicker. She salts with a measure taken from a stone jar whose lid is heavy, because truth is heavy. Butter is washed in many waters here, each wash a sentence that ends with agreement. A wooden paddle lies on the rim of a shallow bowl and forgets to fall. Gardens feed the kitchens in a grammar of beds and paths. Beyond the wall, terraces hold soil where rain would otherwise take it downhill. Dry laid stones stack without mortar, each finding its neighbour's convenience. A gardener pushes a hoop hoe along a line between lettuces. The blade whispers like silk against silk. He draws a small furrow with the handle end and drops in seeds that look more like dots than ambitions. He covers them with sand because sand is honest about drainage. A gate leads to an orchard where a ladder leans on a quince tree at an angle that carpenters would approve. The ladder's feet sit on stones, set to keep them from sinking when the ground tries to pretend it is less firm. At the garden's edge, a system wears a lid like a thoughtful hat. A winch turns a rope that has never met a knot it did not understand. The bucket rises with a calm that argues for gravity's good intentions. The gardener fills a channel cut in the soil with a trowel's edge and watches the water proceed at the speed of a patient goat. Clay pipes under the path carry a stealthy trickle to beds that prefer surprise. On the path, shallow hollows hold last rain in memory. A lizard stops to consider whether this is still news. The butcher's block is a geometry lesson. Hooks, cleavers, saws, and cords all stand at attention. All of them have a taste for drama. The butcher counts ribs, not because he doubts the beast, but because counting is how he honors it. He weighs a shoulder on the steel yard and moves the rider with the gentleness of adjusting a baby's cap. He binds meat with twine that will open when asked, slices fat into squares that will learn to be helpful in a pan, and lays bones aside for a pot that knows more about soup than anyone. He wipes the board with a cloth dedicated to that job. The cloth goes into a bucket with hot water and a shaving of soap that smells like virtue. A delivery from the mill arrives, sacks of wheat that learn the river's slow dancing, now tied at the neck with a double bow. The flour men untie, bleed a little to show whiteness, and tie again with the knowing hands of those who respect powder. The sacks are stacked on wooden slats that teach them elevation, because floors can sweat when weather chooses certain moods. A mouse thinks about an opportunity and changes its mind upon seeing the cat sleeping on a shelf in an attitude that says, "We are done here for now." The record keeper sits at a slanted desk under a window that holds a square of sky like a borrowed tile. His reed pen is trimmed to write without shouting. He adds lines that are mostly nouns: wood, onions, saffron, rice, lamb, salt, vinegar, apricots, almonds, yogurt, mint. Each line ends with a numeral and a mark that means came or went. He does not philosophize with his pen. He marks the wax of a jar with the kitchen seal, a small ladle and a sprig. He ties a cord that opens before it argues. He sands the ink lightly and returns to his tea, which has learned to be lukewarm without being offended. As the sun draws a long thought across the courtyard, trays are set, brass plates shine with the effort of those who prefer clean to new. Bowls sit in rings cut into wooden boards, so they will not travel. A runner walks a line from kitchen to gatehouse, balancing 3 bowls on his left hand and a 4th in his right. The bowls do not complain, because the runner learned from the same stone floors the cooks learned from. A second runner follows, carrying bread in a cloth that forgives heat. Their steps are shorter coming back. When the call to the evening meal arrives, it arrives not like a trumpet, but like a ladle, useful and familiar. The kitchens are not a stage, they are a schedule. Bowls return empty, the scrape of spoon on brass leaves a crescent that pleases the dishwasher, because crescents mean the day made sense. The dishwasher tips bowls into a pan, pours hot water, and lets a ring of soap circle the oil like a mild debate that ends in compromise. Night trims the kitchens to embers and breath. The coal bed is raked into parallel lines, so morning will know where to begin. The spice door locks, the key returns to its hook with the click. That means we have done what we can. Knives rest in their grooves, the steel stands like a silent usher. A pot is turned upside down on a cloth, so dust will find the cloth instead of the pot. The cat finds a span between 2 warm bricks and chooses to resemble a comma in a sentence that will continue tomorrow. If sleep arrives, let it. Scales will keep their memory of level jars, will keep their cool lids, will keep their seals cords, will keep their courtesy fires, will keep their manners knives, will keep their promise to be where they were left stones, will keep the gardens from travelling water, will keep its root ledgers, will keep their nouns in straight lines. Kitchens are where hunger becomes peace by a method anyone can learn, and peace, like a simmer, prefers low heat and time. Pocket pitchers to carry forward, a brass weight set down with a neighbourly tap, rice rinsed until the water tells the truth, a saffron packet tied and sealed with a sprig and dot, an oven door answering in hollow syllables, flour. Tokens in a board of holes, like a constellation, yogurt in a knot of cloth, learning patience, a hoop, her whispering along a lettuce row, a cistern rope turning a winch that knows how to forgive a butcher's rider siding to the mark, and stained knives in a board groove, like notes in a staff, a tray with rings that keep bowls honest, a coal bed drawn into parallel lines just before good night. If sleep arrives, let it. The Ottoman kitchens and gardens will keep your place measures remembered, flame disciplined, water guided, so that morning will have fewer decisions to make. The 6th part. The council chamber prefers early light that arrives as if it had been invited the night before. Windows sit high, their shutters turning slowly from grey to honey. On the floor, carpets rehearse quiet with their pile brushed one way, then the other, until they look like still water after a kindness. A low table waits with legs that curl like the comtails of cats. In the corner, a brazier holds a single coal under ash, the idea of fire rather than its argument. Scribes come first, because paper is a guest that deserves a made bed. They open chests that smell of cedar and starch. Bundles wrapped in cloth lie inside like patient birds. A clerk unties cords that open. Before they argue, he rolls the cloth back to show the day's tools. Reed pens trimmed yesterday. A knife the length of a palm. Pumice to humble rough paper. A cake of ink as black as a decision that has been slept on. He draws a reed across a whetstone once, twice, then tastes the nib on his thumbnail. A tradition older than his grandfather's insistence on right angles. The main table receives a pad of felt, then sheets cut larger than a generous hand. A child could mistake the top sheet for blank sea. The scribe knows it is already lined with the thin, invisible rules of habit. He rubs the paper with pumice, so the fibers will not bristle at ink. He breathes on the ink cake and drops in water with a brush that remembers both patience and purpose. When the brush turns black, it sighs in the shallow dish. The first pen is dipped, lifted, allowed to gather just enough. The hand hovers and then lands. Letters appear like a flock that agreed beforehand to behave. Outside, a bell the size of a plum notes the hour for those who like their hours honest. Inside, slippers make the soft sound of permission. Along the carpet, the chamberlains check hinges with fingertips, curtains with a tug that would not disturb a moth. a silver inkwell, and a sand sprinkler stand on a small tray near the headplace. The sand is fine, sieved through a cloth, and it will fall like polite rain to turn a wet line into a dry thought. The seal press a simple lever, and a plate engraved with the state's quiet pride waits under a cloth. Nothing here pretends to drama. The weight of the room is stored low, in wood and wool. The council arrives the way a tide does, present and unsurprised. Robes move with the gravity of good cloth. Greetings become nods, nods become silence, silence becomes work. A petition is brought, folded, red-twined, bearing 3 small seals impressed on clay pellets. The pellets show a sprig, a ring, and a tidy knot. Each means a thing to those who have learned the vocabulary of fingers and heat. The chief scribe cuts the thread with a knife that never hurries, lays the pellets on a small dish, lifts the first leaf, and begins to read in a voice that keeps company without trying to lead. What is read? Mostly nouns, sometimes numbers that have been softened by daylight. A bridge's planks, a millstones, a field's boundary marked by poplars that no longer stand where everyone remembers they once did. A man asks that the tax consider what the flood remembered and what it forgot. A woman asks that a weight used in the lower market be taught to love 0. A guild asks to keep the shape of its seal, while admitting to new hands to the rope that opens jars. The council listens with ears that have practiced not interrupting. A steward notes names with an alphabet that does not seek applause. The court sentence is time, minutes here and generosity there. When an order is ready to be born, the Togra master is called. He is neither young nor old, he belongs to the curve. The Togra is the sovereign sign drawn like a braid of rivers, meeting in one compole. The pen is held upright, the wrist leads. Then the fingers, the ink is a shade heavier for the first, lighter for the last. The master breathes, and then draws, free uprights like reeds learning wind. Loops that remember how to turn without breaking. A tail that resolves like a piece of rope tucked back under itself. The room watches, not because it is rare, but because it is right. When the ink reaches the end of itself, the Togra leans back quietly on the page, as if it had existed there all along, and was merely being revealed. The order is read again, now with its crown. A witness line is drawn in the margin, a slender vertical to receive the signatures of those whose names are trusted to behave. A clerk sands the wet ink. He lifts the paper by 2 corners and holds it to the light. The sheet reveals its wave, the pattern pressed into it by the frame, which it once rested, long before ink and intention. He smiles at the thought that paper remembers more than anyone in the room does. In an anteroom, a small discipline unfolds. A boy cuts sheets to size against a wooden block with a knife that insists on calm shoulders. He stacks them in families of 10. He turns each family once to teach the edges agreement. He ties the stack with a thread he could break with 2 fingers, but does not. He stamps the corner with a blind seal, a no ink impression that says, "This paper grew up in a careful house." On the floor, a basket holds offcuts that will become lists, drafts, and small proofs of thought. Nothing here is scrap, everything is future. A messenger steps in from the courtyard. His boots are dusted with the kind of distance that means today and yesterday, not more. He bows, not low, with the respect that understands knees and backs. A cord seals the leather case he carries. The knot opens when asked, and only when asked. The case holds 3 orders, one for a bridge keeper, to repaint witness lines where the flood rubbed them thin, one for a mill to adjust its toll for a year when rain accepted a vacation, one for a market inspector to test 3 weights and burn a 4th if it lies. The messenger takes a cup he did not request, drinks half, and accepts a second cord for the case. It is dyed red, not for importance, but to be found quickly in a bag of identical cousins. Midday, and the chamber's air becomes bread and mint for a while. Bowls arrive not too hot, not too many, and are set on a low shelf near the window. Work does not stop, it leans back, like a man on 2 legs of a chair for a moment. A scribe takes a bite and writes a date. He does not write it in numbers that shout, he writes a month and a week, and a phrase that notes the river's mood, because rivers are truer calendars than rulers. A second scribe mixes fresh ink. He sets the dish near the window, and watches the surface turn from water to thought. He remembers a teacher. Ink is a polite guest. Never invite more than you can keep company with. After the bowls are gone and the sand has dried more decisions into the page, a chest is carried in from the archives. Its lid is not locked, it is heavy. Within, books sit like sleeping British ledgers bound in leather too modest to boast. Each ledger holds a road, a mill, a tax farm, a garden, a pier. The archivist uses two pieces of wood to lift a book without hurting its spine. He opens to a page that remembers a winter the city would rather not repeat. Margins hold small notes like stitches. A slip of paper peeks out where someone wanted to find the place again later and did. He removes the slip, copies the note, and returns the slip not to the page, but to the pocket in the back cover where slips are supposed to convalesce. Below the council, in the chancery, the press room breathes in lines and exhales decisions. A lever brings the seal die down onto a warmed pellet. The impression is firm and not hurried. Assistants lay the sealed orders in a tray and sprinkle fine sand between sheets, so no line will embrace another without consent. On another table, cords are cut to length and tipped with wax to prevent mischief. A clerk threads a cord through two holes, crosses the tails, and presses a small wafer over the crossing. The wafer holds the mark of the office, a modest design that a child could draw into strokes. When evening approaches, the day's work becomes a pile that makes sense from any angles. Orders to be sent sit under a stone that wears a groove from such sitting. The ledger closes with a weight of ribbon between its leaves to note the first page for tomorrow. Pens return to their roll. The ink dish is rinsed with water that is made to feel well used simply by being poured with respect. The floor sees a broom and remains unoffended. The brazier's idea of fire becomes a thought about embers, and then a memory of warmth. Outside, the courtyard receives the day's last steps. A fountain behaves itself in a corner, the stream falling from a lion spout that never roars. Pigeons decide in committee to leave a little sooner than usual. The messenger with the red cord leaves, and the gate honors him by participating in his momentum. The archivist ties the chest with the same knot that will open without argument, though not for anyone's careless hands. On the sill, a tea glass has forgotten whether it was half full. A hand claims it and ends the debate. Night is when law shows its better face, not punishment, but promise. In the empty room, the seal press sits patient. The sandbox is a small beach asleep. The tugra on the mornings order dries to a soft certainty. If anyone walks through, they will touch the table out of habit, as if it were the shoulder of a calm horse. The chamber keeps its breath level. The doors know which way to move when they are asked. The windows accept the night as a guest who will leave at dawn without wakening the house. If sleep arrives, let it. Pens will keep their point. Ink will keep its shade seals, will keep their witness cords, will keep their consent sand, will keep its soft deeds. Ledgers will keep their straightness knots, will keep their courtesy chests, will keep their quiet windows, will keep their pale promises. Councils are the town's way of tying many small threads into one rope, and then remembering not to pull too hard. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A reed pen tasted on a thumbnail, a cord that opens before it argues. A tugra drawn in one breath that feels like three. A sand shaker sewing a small indoor rain. A seal press that lowers like a handshake. A ledger lifted with two thin boards. A messenger's case with two cords, one plain, one red. A chest that locks with heaviness, not trickery. A tea glass that forgot its opinion. A window where paper shows its watermark like a shy fingerprint. If sleep arrives, let it. The Ottoman Council and Chancery will keep your place among pens and seals, cords and sand, so that morning can be asked politely to become afternoon. The seventh part. Water arrives in a city the way a calm guest arrives at a door. Not too soon, not too late. Carrying gifts you only notice once you've set them down. In the pre-dawn blue, the aqueduct beyond the walls is a long, patient sentence over small valleys and shallow folds of earth. Arches carry a channel no wider than a man's stride. The channel holds a trickle that can become a conversation and, with help, a chorus. At its head, a sluice is lifted by a bar that fits the hand like a tool remembered from childhood. The keeper listens to the water with his cheek near the stone, then nods the day has the right beginning. In the lower town, a grate in the street whispers as the first flow finds marble runnels that choose useful directions. Covered channels take most of it underfoot, but here and there, inspection wells blink up at the sky with round lids. The lids are lifted with a hook shaped like a question that expects an answer. The answer is a clear thread along brick, the scent of coolness and lime. A cistern under a square opens to a circle of air, steps descend, and a vaulted room greets the visitor with pillars that behave themselves. Lamps reflect as coins would, if coins had learned humility. The surface is a clock that keeps time without numbers. Fountains wake by habit. A lion head admits to its role and lets the stream fall into a trough worn into a precise kindness by many ewers. A second spout plane generous feeds a basin set lower for buckets and beasts. A child lowers a gourd and watches its shadow widen. The keeper rubs a thin ring of tallow on the bronze valve, so turning will keep its civility. He lifts a wicker screen from the intake and catches a leaf that wished to travel too far. A boy leans a broom against the fountain base and uses his hands instead. Some jobs are better with hands, because hands remember. The hammam's dome keeps last night until steam persuades it to join today. Round windows of thick glass, small moons let in pale discs of light that drift across the plaster like slow fish. Beneath, the warm room holds benches around the octagon, and the marble floor shows faint slope lines that teach water to leave gracefully. A brazier in a back chamber has been fed with wood that burns like a polite argument. The furnace breathes under the belly of the marble slab, the gibek tar warming it to the temperature of a long-held thought. The bath attendants arrive with bundles of towels stacked in precise towers. Cotton smells of soap, sun, and the decision to be clean. Bowls of copper are set near each niche. Their rims are tapped with a knuckle to ensure their sound will not trouble anyone. Soap rests in a dish the way a seal rests on wax shaped by use, committed to its work. Olive oil in a narrow-necked flask waits for the lesson it will teach to skin and sinew. A brush with bristles that know what gentle means rests on its side. A small argument against hurry. Water is portioned the way bread is, with common sense. A tap turns a little, a bowl fills a shoulder, learns mercy, a back recalls gratitude. The attendant pours in 2 circles, pauses, and then in 1 line down the spine. A cloth glove keys draws old skin into rolls, as thin as condolence. They are washed away without comment. Fingers press where labor hides knots and tie themselves, or pretend to. The slab warms the words people do not say. In corners, pitchers sing their short songs against the basins. In the hotter room, steam makes a grammar of breath. Conversation falls to the level that keeps friendship warm without ceremony. Men compare the virtues of cold water after heat without needing to be right. Women trade recipes that improve lentils without apology. In the vestibule, someone knits 3 rows and looks pleased at the way the yarn has decided to be obedient. Shoes wait facing away from the door, so the feet that find them will be pointed toward home. Tea glasses collect circles of condensation and then shrug them off. Outside, the Sebla Street kiosk of charity opens its shutters. Within, shelves hold cups washed so clean they reflect without pride. A worker in a simple vest pours water through a cloth into a big jar set on a stand. The cloth catches whatever the morning thought it might add. He sets cups on the ledge, not in a line, but in a pattern that invites without counting. Passers-by take and return. A small ledger keeps tally by marks, not names. Over the window, a stone panel carved with leaves and circles remembers the donor without asking anyone else to. Up the hill, at a madrasa courtyard, the Adavan, the ablution fountain, shows another face of the same idea. Taps ring the base, like careful punctuation stalls, sit waiting for knees. Students wash in order taught by elders and agreed upon by wrists and ankles. Hands to wrists, mouth, nose, face, arms, head, ears, feet. Water leaves by channels cut so thin they seem like decisions made by a careful mind. The floor dries as if it had learned the trick from wind. Beyond the hammam, the aqueduct bends into pipes of baked clay where a street insists on narrowness. Each pipe knows its neighbor by a socket and a wrap of linen brushed with pitch. Joints are tested with a full bowl held underneath. Drops that appear are invited to stop with a turn of string that learns a better obedience. At corners, a small stone chamber admits to being a pressure brake. Its lid is lifted, the level studied, the outlet adjusted. The keeper scratches a mark in the plaster with a nail, not a letter, only a line as tall as his thumbnail. It is enough to remember. In a mansion garden, the same water decides to be theatre without raising its voice. A rill threads along the edge of citrus trees, drawing a rectangle around shade. A small jet rises from a bronze beak and falls into a basin that allows itself to be a mirror. To fish become moons and then fish again, over and over, without boredom. A gardener lifts a tile and changes the route from the south bed to the north, a decision that takes less time than a word. A child floats a leaf boat from the rill entry to the basin and learns without lecture what slope and friction mean. At the Mint, where coins are the city's watering metal, a trough calls blanks between strikes. The same channels, the same valves, the same idea that heat and pressure must be guided and soothed. A man lifts a blank with tongs, sets it on the anvil, and lowers the die with one strike. He holds the coin up and then dips it into the trough. It clicks against the others with a sound that says now. The foreman notes the counts with a chalk on slate, then wipes a line smooth with his thumb. Accounts and rivers prefer clarity. Evening brings the day's proof. The Hammam slab calls to a temperature that confesses the hour. Towels are bundled into baskets. Floors are rinsed from high to low, always toward the drain no one notices. The dome releases its held breath through vents that know how to agree with wind. The cistern keeper descends once more. Lamp in hand, he inspects the water's skin for dust and leaves a thin trail of light behind. He marks the pillar with a charcoal notch. Today's level next to last week's, next to last year's. The history of a city can be read in these lines. If a person is patient, night finds fountains speaking less and listening more. A single spout is left running to keep the pipes honest. Cats drink politely and leave the ledgers clean as they found it. The Sebel shutters are closed cups, stacked ledger put away. The aqueduct outside the walls turns from stone to shadow, and from shadow to the idea of reliability. The street grate whispers one last time and sleeps. In the hammam, someone has left a bowl upside down, and a drop of water sits like a coin that has decided to be generous. If sleep arrives, let it. Arches will keep their span channels, will keep their slope valves, will keep their temper basins, will keep their rim domes, will keep their moon slabs, will keep their warmth. As long as warmth is wanted, towels will keep their folded patient cisterns, will keep their cool ledgers, will keep their marks. Coins will keep their click. Cities are bodies that learn to bathe themselves, and baths are promises kept with water and time. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A cistern stair winding to a lamplit mirror, a fountain spout oiled with a finger, a dome of round lights, like small moons, a key's glove drawing quiet spirals, a Sebel window with cups like little bells, a rill shifting direction with one lifted tile, a pressure brake chamber with a lid that remembers hands, a pillar with thin charcoal notches, years are small. Patient lines, a trough cooling coin banks that just learn their faces, a bowl left upside down catching one generous drop. If sleep arrives, let it. The Ottoman baths and waters will keep your place among arches and runnels, bowls and basins, so that morning can wake to a city already gentle. The eighth part. Roads do not hurry. They keep the shape of patience across plains and up small ridges, stitching towns to wells, wells to passes, passes to markets. At first light, a caravanserai stone square certain opens its gate with the sound of wood being reasonable. Inside the court, hoofs have drawn their soft circles through the dust. A trough waits along one wall, and a line of ring bolts keeps stories from wandering while loads are balanced. A lantern is snuffed and left warm, a rope is coiled in a way that promises to uncoil politely. Mule bells speak the grammar of setting out, not loud, never insistent, just a necklace of tones that agree with distance. A handler checks each pack saddle with a palm that knows where pressure hides. Blankets are smoothed, girths are lowered, and then lifted with a tug that is more kindness than force. Knots are the same ones used by his father reef for straps, clove for a ring, a bowline where a loop must never forget itself. Leather creaks, not because it complains, but because leather is a singer of small truths. By the stables, the farrier's bench is a geometry of order, hoof knife, rasp, nails that have learned to be triangular in opinion and yet end with a soft round head. A mare stands with her foreleg tucked gently into the crook of the farrier's arm. The rasp moves in even strokes, taking away everything that is not a good circle. A shoe warmed in coals is pressed to the hoof, smoke rises without temper and writes a brief line in the cool air. The shoe is quenched, then nailed with taps that count themselves. 1, 2, 3 on the outside branch, 1, 2 on the inside clinch. Clincher thumb presses the finished work and finds it willing. In the consume store, a scale waits with its beam level as a horizon. Sacks of dates are weighed, the beam dips, and rises. Brass weights take their turn like courteous witnesses. A clerk notes measures in a hand trained to keep its straightness even when the world leans. The ink is not new, it prefers to remember yesterday. A cord is tied around each sack's neck with a slip knot that opens when asked, then sealed with a small pellet of wax. The seal shows the heart's quiet flower, pressed by a stamp that minds its own business. Breakfast is the road's simplest ceremony. A pot of tea agrees to boil, and then to comb flatbread touches a griddle and learns its spakes of brown. A small pan listens to butter, and honey rehearse a friendship. Saddlebags receive a ration, dried apricots chosen with 2 fingers, almonds counted without words, a paper twist of salt that will be enough. Water skins are filled at the quart spout, rubbed with a hand, so the leather remembers to remain soft. A handler lifts one skin and judges the day's heat by its willingness to sweat. The caravan master stoops over a map that is less a picture than a method. A line for the ridge, dots 4 gnome wells, a crescent for a shade tree, a cross where a relay post promises fresh hooves. He taps a fingernail on the margin where a note says, if wind, then early, if dust, then cloth. He folds the map without scolding its creases. The first order is not given by voice, but by gait. The master walks, and the led mule follows, and then the straightening of the line travels back through bells and straps like a breeze through reeds. Outside the gate, the road shows its measures. Milestones squat like small domes, their shoulders rubbed smooth by rain and friendliness. Between them, the ground is taut where water must go. When rain has thoughts, drainage ditches run shallow and calm. Culverts tuck under where a wash might wish to argue. A bridge of 3 arches crosses a narrow cut. Its parapet is not tall and does not pretend to be. A white thread of water beneath accepts the day's first sun and becomes a modest mirror. A relay postman enters the morning a sentence that knows where to pause. Low buildings, a corral, a well under a roof, a hook for a lantern, a rack with shoes drying from last night's rain. The postkeeper knows the language of hearses and paper. He takes a leather tube with 2 cords. One cord is tied now, the other will be tied when the message leaves again. So journeys can be counted not only by hooves, but by nuts. He stamps a slip knot with ink, but with pressure alone, and lets it dry against a wall where shadows are patient. The road climbs where the land offers a spine. Switchbacks cut their letters along the slope. A mule leans, a handler steps, weight shifts, straps hum. In the distance a pass shows an opening the size of common sense. 2 shepherds share the path for a while. The dogs look professional and uninterested in theatre. A small stone altar at a bend holds a fresh spray of wild thyme. It is there because someone lost a load long ago and found it again. At noon, shade is courtesy and everyone is rich enough. A single acacia holds its measured circle of shadow. Saddles slip to the ground, nosebags. A fielder lion is stretched between 2 pegs and learns to be a kitchen. Tea again, because the road is polite and does not demand novelty. A pot is set low. A flame kept moderate. Bread becomes edible. History with cheese and a slice of melon that forgives heat. Someone tells a story about a night wind that returned a hat. No one disbelieves it. Hats, like roads, keep promises some of the time. Afternoon, the earth opens into long sentences. Tracks fork the right-hand path, has a faint seam of broken shells because it once led to a market by the sea. The master chooses the left, where the soil remembers the weight of grain carts. Clouds throw slow boats of shade across flats that would otherwise be too honest. A column of ants crosses the caravan, waits without discussion. A lark rises, argues clear harmless points, and returns to its business. In the late light, a market appears in the manner of a slow blossom. Canopies flicker into place, ropes fly up to hooks. Then tension themselves, poles stand like tired men who have nevertheless decided to be upright. Scales hang, weights wake their numbers. A butcher's block is rubbed with vinegar. A spice tray shows its saffron and evening threads. A soap seller slices cakes the color of afternoon. The caravan rolls in. Without claims, baskets are lifted, handshakes take their proper time. The evening count is proof that a day has not escaped. Loads are tallied, hoofs checked, a shoe replaced where a nail confessed to fatigue. In a corner of the cons yard, a boy learns to plait a new lead from 3 chords, left over right, right over left, until a neat herringbone appears and stays. A girl pours water slowly along the backs of 2 mules. The water runs black for a moment, then clear. She rubs their ears and whispers a joke that needs no laughter to be complete. Night at the caravanserai, a square of lanterns and acceptance. Men talk in sentences with many commas. Women fold cloth so that it can be trusted to unfold later. Children discover that dust is a good bed if you ask it gently. A jackal calls twice and is answered by a dog that knows when a dialogue has reached its best length. Across the court, someone tunes a long-necked lute to the pitch of a bowl being filled. The tune itself does not insist on being remembered, it does most of its work right away. The gate is pulled to, not closed, untied with a knot that opens before it argues. The keeper of the night makes a round with a lamp set low to spare the moths. He touches ring bolts, tests the gate, nods to the well's lid, checks the brazier's ash, and writes a line on a slate. Bells quiet, shoes dry, straps cold water, honest moonkind. He leans the slate where morning will see it without feeling summoned. If sleep arrives, let it. Roads will keep their slope milestones, will keep their patience pegs, will keep their ground ropes, will keep their labels, will keep their gentle sentences. Shoes will keep their grip, maps will keep their folds, knots will keep their courtesy, scales will keep their level, lanterns will keep their small geography. Caravans are moving schools of agreement. The road is a teacher who never raises a voice. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A farrier's rasp drawing a circle into a hoof, a beam scales arm, settling a wax pellet. With a flower's ghost, a water skin beading cool, a map with a crescent near a shade tree, a switchback like. Writing on a hillside, an altar of time on a bend, an acacia's shadow, with nose bags like quiet bells. A herringbone lead growing under small hands, a slate with 5 simple blessings for the night. If sleep arrives, let it. The road and its inns will keep your place among bells and bridges, knots and milestones, so that morning can inherit a journey already half agreed. The 9th part. Harbours speak softly when they are well kept. At grey first light the keystones are the colour of patient bread. Their joints are brushed with sand where last night's wash lingered and went home. Iron rings rest with the calm of old shoulders. Fenders made of rope and cork dangle, each one a small promise that wood will meet stone kindly. The tide is not dramatic here, it is a habit. A watchman tests a bollard with his palm, as if greeting an elder. The metal is cool and ready to be believed. A skiff arrives before the sun decides on gold. The oars are pulled without arguing with the locks. The water answers in a measured chorus. At the quay's edge, a line coils itself into a tidy circle, because the hand that set it down the trick from the same stones that learned the trick of staying. The bowman throws a heaving line. It arcs like a mild question and lands near the ring. The tail is made fast with a round turn unto half hitches that open when asked and never before. A second line goes to a wooden bit that has known many ropes and never encouraged a quarrel. The shipyard wakes by tools rather than voices. An adze falls in a steady rhythm, or a plank's edge shavings gather like well-behaved curls. A caulker teases oakum from a rope end, twists it, and sets it into a seam with a creaking mallet that speaks the language of small persistence. A pot of pitch over a charcoal pan becomes gloss, not smoke when brushed along the seam. It settles as if it had been waiting for permission. Tree nails, shaved to confident tapers, are driven into bored holes. With a dignified knock, the plank learns loyalty to the frame. On the ways near the waterline, a hole rests on blocks that accept weight without opinion. Wedges are tapped here and there with 2 fingers forced to remind the curve to hold its shape. A capstan stands on the yard spine, its bars wait like patient shoulders. Ropes lead through blocks, whose sheaves have been oiled just enough to chew silence. When a boat must be shifted, men lean into the bars and walk in a circle that is neither hurried nor symbolic. The whole moves. A boy watches the distance grow a finger's width and smiles at the power of good circles. Depth is a kind of honesty. A leadsman in a harbour boat lowers a line that carries leather, cloth, and rope marks at the fathoms. The line hums against the gunwale and then softens when it rises. Tallow from the lead's hollow brings back grains that tell the truth about the bottom. Sand means comfort, broken shell means caution, fine mud means a good hold for an anchor that prefers to be believed. The keeper notes the soundings in a small book that is not here. The book lives in his head until evening. Where numbers go the moment they find a chair. The customs shed prefers morning shade. A balance rule stands on a table with its pan cleaned and its tongue centered. Bales arrive wool bound with twine that opens silk wrapped and tied like a prayer that understands not. Spice jars corked and sealed with a wafer that takes the stamp of the office and keeps it without fuss. A clerk opens nothing but the ledger. His pen travels without spectacle. A noun, a measure, a mark, a second column for the promise that tax will follow the usual road. He likes the way the sand dries the line into a quiet fact. Fishermen come in with the first honest sun. Nets pile into the skiff with the gravity of wet hands. Work in pairs to free a hook's idea without harming the idea of fish. A low table receives the catcher hose plain. Linen wrapped, just enough pressure washes scales into a channel that leads to the sea by way of a basket that will be emptied at the right hour. A beam scale appears, a weight of brass nods. A tray lifts words. A few a token passes to a cord at the fisher's belt later. The token will return as bread, salt, or wood. The exchange is not sentimental, it is pleasant. At the rigging loft, a floor of pale boards keeps the day bright. A sailmaker's palm gleams at the wrist of a man who has been kind to canvas for decades. He pushes a needle through thick cloth along a chalk line that curves with an understanding of wind. The stitch is a flat seam that will let wind run and not trip. A bolt rope is laid and sewn, and with every pierce the needle meets the thimble of the palm and agrees to continue. Grommets are set with a punch and a wooden block, their circles becoming small doors through which lines will later keep their promises. The rope walk runs like a private street behind the sheds. Hooks turn strands are walked out and paid in tar is brushed with a sparing hand where weather asks. Boys count steps and hum, because humming keeps pace unembarrassed. At the end a hawser grows from strands that know how to share. It is laid in a coil the size of a table and wears a stick through its eye to remind it of the direction it prefers. Beside it smaller lines keep their households, buntlines, clue lines, sheets, braces, names from other tongues, all sensible when they meet work. On the quay, rings set in stone are spared from squeal by a smear of tallow rubbed thin with a rag that relishes such purpose. Fenders are shifted a hand's breadth when a tide decides to think sideways. A boy learns the proper throw of a heaving line by sending it again and again at the same ring until the ring begins to expect him. He will fail a dozen times without harm and succeed once without fuss that will be the right proportion for a day. A crane with a wooden jib turns like a considerate neck. Its worm gear accepts a handle, and the load rises in the slow dialect of physics and patience. Slings cradle casks a hook that knows how to sleep points down. A signalman's hand opens, closes, points, the load obeys. On the deck of a ketch, a hatch beam comes off, and his set-aside casks go down to where dark and cool conspire, and a chalk mark on each cask's head tells a tally to someone's memory and to no one's eyes. Chalk will not wake a reader, a night ink might. Pilots know that harbours are made of wind edges more than walls. In the late morning, as the sea breeze begins its daily courtesy, a pilot in a grey coat takes the tiller of a vessel large enough to want diplomacy. He judges the stream. Where it meets the quay outflow, a palm shows pressure against the rudder that eyes would miss. He raises to fingers, and the deckhand eases a sheet. The whole's opinion changes slightly and agrees to the keys. Suggestion. The bowline is tossed. The stern line follows. The boat settles. The pilot nods as if he had merely remembered something obvious. By noon the yard smells of pitch and wood that has argued its way into curve and length. A tray of olives, bread, and cheese visits tool benches as if it were taking notes. An adze is stood in a bucket with a little water, so its iron will keep from thirst. A plane lies on its side, because only careless hands leave a blade up. A carpenter sharpens on a stone that learned the difference between bevel and back. He strops on leather, but holds a little oil and the history of edges. He tests with the light, not his thumb. Afternoon invites painting to have its say. A long brush with hair that never scolds lays a line, the width of a finger along a waterline chopped at dawn. Red ochre meets black bitumen at a join that will be admired by no one who is not paid to notice that is proper. A boy applies varnish to an oar blade with care not to build a ridge at the edge. He wipes once and once only, because wiping twice is how ridges are born. He sets the oar where dust will be tempted to visit and hope defeated by patience and height. Beyond the yard the mole reaches out with a low hand to quiet the sea's small habits, mooring posts on its face where rings of iron that have learned to be kind. At the end, a beacon on a stone tower shows 2 panes of glass. By day nothing, by evening a lamp that does not insist on poetry. The wick is trimmed, the oil is clean, the reflectors are wiped with cloth that will never touch pitch. The keeper turns the glass a finger's width to make the light step rather than kick. He notes the hour with a charcoal mark on the door sill that rain will adopt later. Toward evening the harbour gentilizes itself. Boats settle on their lines, bow to the soft pull, and nod at their neighbours' goals, fold their arguments, and go elsewhere. A cat finds a coil and becomes an answer to a question the day no longer asks. The tide turns without announcement, as it prefers. A man sits by a ring bolt and mends a net with a mesh stick and bone needle. The knot he ties will open when scolded by a finger, and never before. He hums with respect. 4 knots a humming man, and a knotted net share a consent about work and its ending. The last duty belongs to the ledger in the harbour office. A page receives the day, arrivals, departures, drafts, cargo types without poetry. A second page receives repairs, planking renewed on slip to mast shoe eased on ketch, with green stern caulking complete on yawl, with yellow fenders, white lead applied to transom of garden boat. The writer uses a pencil that has been sharpened with a knife rather than a point that would shout. The letters are square and unremarkable, the lines behave. A stamp presses a small ship's wheel into the corner without ink. It says, "This page has been paid attention." Night softens the yard to silhouettes of competence. The capstan bars are stowed. The worm gear is covered with cloth. The pitch pot is capped. The adze is wiped, and hung coils are hung on belaying pins that expect them and will remember the last turn tomorrow. The yard's door is closed by a latch that lowers rather than slams. The water under the quay holds the orange of 2 lamps and then forgets it kindly as the breeze turns to a slower thought. Out on the mole the beacon finds its stride. It is not a drama, it is a schedule. If sleep arrives, let it. Rings will keep their patience, ropes will keep their lay wedges, will keep their mine planks, will keep their curved seams, will keep their pitch marks, will keep their depth fenders, will keep their kindness leads, will keep their tallow small truths hawsers, will keep their eye lamps, will keep their trim. Harbours are the city's way of shaking hands with weather and coming away with everyone's dignity intact. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A heaving line landing in a quiet loop, oakum teased and tapped into a seam, a capstan moving a hull, the width of a finger, a sounding lead, lifting grains of shell in tallow, a palm pushing a needle through a bold rope tar brushed along a hawser with moderation, a boy hitting the same ring until the ring begins to expect him, a crane's worm gear turning a load that obeys a pilot's to finger signal, changing a hole's mind, a beacon wick trimmed to a clean oval of flame. If sleep arrives, let it. The harbour and the yard will keep your place among rings and ropes, nets and notes, so that morning can borrow a tide already inclined to be useful. The 10th part. Markets wake with a hush that knows how to become a murmur, and then politely stop. In the hour when lamps are still opinions rather than facts, awnings loosen from their night knots and travel up with a long breath of canvas. Poles step into their shoes, cords find their hooks and tug themselves just enough to learn the day's wind. Stones underfoot hold last night's call. A broom draws a lane where feet will learn to agree. At the gate, a weight inspector mutasib tests his balance with an empty pan and a look that prefers level horizons. Wheat arrives in sacks that remember fields. The cloth is patched at the knees like an honest worker. Each sack shoulders onto the scale. The beam dips, hesitates, returns. Brass waits 1, 2, 5 take their places like quiet elders who have each seen the same calendar many times. The clerk's pen proposes numbers, then agrees with them. A seal pellet is warmed between 2 fingers and finds the sack's neck. The stamp sinks a small evergreen into wax and leaves. The not used is the one that opens when asked. It is not asked. At the mill the day begins speaking low. Stones turn because water makes a promise through a wooden race. The upper stone watches the lower one with a space as thin as a word held back. The miller pinches flour from the tail and rubs it between finger and thumb. He nods when it feels like memory. A sieve wakes. It does its circular thinking over a tub, then rests its metal rim against wood. Grain becomes meal, becomes flour, flour becomes dough in a room where hands are the only clocks that matter. Bakers make light from fire without haste. A bench remembers yesterday's scatter of flour. A wooden trough receives water that a finger judges by singing its own name against the bowl. Salt is pinched with 2 fingers. Yeast is coaxed like a shy friend who has kept a good secret. Dough leans under a palm and yields in time. The baker folds, turns, presses, waits. A peel is dusted, a door opened, the oven's heat red from the color of its throat. No numbers are spoken. Red tells the truth in a dialect the baker learned as a boy. Shapes are a grammar of neighborhoods. Round loaves with a thumb's dent, long loaves with a braided wish, flat rounds punctured like constellations so steam will not overarc. Some breads wear a stamp pressed from wet wood, a symbol of the bakery, a quiet pledge of weight and measure. The stamp leaves a relief that the oven will teach to brown. A boy carries the first tray to the window, where a cue will become a conversation. A woman checks the crust with a knuckle tap that sounds like a soft agreement. The bazaar's bones are sound, alleys that tilt just enough to teach water to behave, drains that own their job and do not ask for attention, benches that sit between stall and passage to invite talk that is not a claim but a kindness. Scales hang in doorways, a beam here, a steel yard there, each one checked by the inspector with a reference weight that has no patience for compliments. A fruit seller arranges figs by softness rather than size. A spice man opens jars that keep their secrets under wax cloth. A pepper's story and the cinnamon's memory rise and then sit down again. In a corner the coffee boiler lights a charcoal pan that will keep its small ember all day. Copper pots hang like bells. Water agrees to come at the lip and foam at the rim without spilling its opinion. Cups wait face down on a tray to learn a warmth that is not showing off. The first pours go to old men who remember a siege that never came and a flood that did. Sugar arrives in discretion. The talk is not loud, it moves like shade across the paving slow. Consider it. Therefore everyone. Weights and measures are the city's manners made visible. The mutasib visits the soap cellar and sets a bar on the scale. The beam levels, he nods, leaves a small chalk mark on the counter, a square that means kept faith today. He goes on to the oil merchant and dips a rod into a jar. The line it leaves on wood matches the one of last week olives, and patience of being honest cousins again. At noon, he will eat a thin stew at the Imret, the charity kitchen the city keeps open with endowments. Waqf so hunger does not learn to shout. The Imret is a grammar of enough. A copper pot the size of a bath tells lentils and onions to become more than themselves. Bread from the morning shares its round habit with hands that need it. A ladle dips, rises, travels the distance from pot to bowl without spilling, because that distance is always learned with the same arm. On the wall a niche holds the ledger, strings of tokens, and a small bell that refuses pride. Beside the gate a jug of water stands shoulder deep in a sleeve of damp cloth, and grows cool by evaporation's quiet arithmetic. Afternoon brings cloth down the main aisle. A weaver rolls out a bolt, the selvage shows a neat patience of finger counts threads, without speaking. A tailor arranges pattern weight smooth stones that would make good paperweights if paper were a lord in this alley here. Cloth is the lord, and stones serve. Needles move with a thimble that bears tiny dents like the moon's polite scars. A cutter pauses halfway through a curve to be sure the line in his mind, and the line on the cloth are acquaintances. The metal workers sing a different meter. Tinware rings when swiped with a finger, copper bowls answer with a lower vowel. A smith shows a hinge that will swing 4 years and keep quiet about it. He draws a leaf pattern along the strap, not to boast, but to teach Russ to find edges and stay there rather than wander the field. A boy wipes the bowls after each admiration. He leaves just enough hand ghost to remind brass that it lives with people and not only with soap. Near sunset, a tax farmer's clerk walks the aisles with a book and a mind prepared for both fairness and the long slope of time. He writes who opened, who closed, who was absent, who sent a cousin. His numbers are unshowy. He knows that a city breathes in and out, and that totals are best read as seasons, not quarrels. Under his arm a piece of chalk sits in a cloth. He will leave 2 marks tonight, one on a door that needs a hinge, one on a drain that deserves a shovel tomorrow. Both will be answered before market wakes again. The baker's last batches leave the oven with a sigh that will persuade pillows later. Crust takes on a dust color. Stamped loaves give up their patterns and settle into baskets. The oven door closes with a wooden kiss. Embers are spread. Ashes banked. The peel leans. A child eats the heel that someone turned away from and finds it to be the best part of a day. The mill slows to a stop. Stones cool. The race empties. The tale of flour is folded into a sack to be the first handful of tomorrow. When stalls close, the bazaar inhales its awnings and becomes the skeleton of a promise. Brooms pull the day into small piles and then into larger decisions. Dogs visit, elegant in their own ways. Cats nod. Pigeons choose an arch. The inspector lays his beam scale to rest with the pans detached and stacked. He locks nothing. He leaves the pans in a cupboard that locks with its own weight. The last lamp on the main aisle, blown out by a breath that made bread earlier and will turn a pillow later. If sleep arrives, let it. Stones will keep their lane. Scales will keep their balance. Stamps will keep their witness. Ovens will keep their memory. Ladles will keep their measure. Jars will keep their cool. Ledgers will keep their straightness. Awnings will keep their fold. Cords will keep their hooks. Tokens will keep their small, faithful circles. Markets are cities learning to tell the truth in public and be pleased with it. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A stamped loaf with a brown relief. A beam scales. Tongue finding center. A sieve circling above a tub. Appeals. Thin shadow in oven light. A token string beside a copper pot. A damp cloth jacket cooling. A jug. A chalk square on a counter. A tailor's stone holding a curve. A hinge whose leaf has taught rust its manners. A ledger closed by its own gravity. If sleep arrives, let it. The market and the bread will keep your place among scales and stamps, sieves and stews, so that morning can inherit a city already measured and kind. The 11th part. Courtyards learn a city's weather and then teach it back to the house. At first shade the flagstones are cool enough to hold a bare footprint without complaint. The pool in the center keeps one small circle of sky as if it were an errand left to soak. A lime-washed wall throws gentle light back into the rooms. A lemon tree, modest and productive, decorates the air without insisting that anyone notice. On the sill, a clay lamp sits with a trimmed wick. It is not a symbol, just a promise to the next hour that darkness will not arrive unannounced. A chest in the corner yields cloth that smells faintly of cedar and soap. From its folds, a warp is drawn. Long cotton threads laid like quiet harp strings across the courtyard to a low loom. The loom itself is a conversation between wood and patience. Pegs hold the warp at one end at the other. It wraps a beam that will roll a little each time a hand is satisfied. Heddle's loops of cord divide the threads into two orderly families. A weaver sits on a cushion, draws a shuttle through, and presses the weft in place with a beater that has learned to be firm without being severe. Patterns arrive the way rain learns a roof line by line, then a turn, then a surprise that is actually a habit. Reds from madder root blues from indigo persuaded into solution with time, and ash yellow from welled olives, and browns from pomegranate rind politely cooked until their secrets are reasonable. Skeins hang like soft flags from a line across the shade. They turn a little in the air and agree to be yarn, not just colour. The weaver ties in a new thread with a knot that hides inside the cloth, a private courtesy that will keep the pattern unbroken when the rug is asked to become floor. Dyeing is a kitchen that learned to take notes. A copper cauldron sits on 3 stones. Its fire is encouraged by sticks that were cut yesterday with tomorrow in mind. Water becomes dye with a mordant's helpalum that teaches colour to remain loyal. A woman stirs with a wooden paddle that knows every part of the circle. She lifts a skein with a rod, lets it cool in air, dips again. She speaks to no one and to the steam, which answers with the smell of plant and patience. On a rope by the wall, skeins dry to song, blue beside red beside gold. A scale that will be played by hands in months, not minutes. Next door, a tinner heats a pot to remind it what tin looks like when it feels useful. He cleans the copper with sand and lemon until it is a colour that makes water thirsty. He lays a thread of tin along the curve and turns the pot, so the thread melts and runs like a decision that has finally been made. He wipes with a rag dipped in salt and ashes. The inside becomes pale and ready to boil milk without teaching it the taste of metal. He sets the pot aside on a board that keeps its rim from learning dents. He works without spectacle. The miracle is tomorrow's porridge untroubled by yesterday's iron. Near the street, a saffron curtain breathes at the entrance to a small workshop where paper learns to float. On a low table sits a tray of thickened waterkite made from plant gum that knows how to hold its peace. A marbler taps pigment from a brush, so the drops spread into flowers on the surface. Oxgall persuades each colour to make room for the next. A comb drawn in an honest line turns flowers into gardens. A stylus adds a river that wanders gently. A sheet of paper is lowered at an angle and laid flat. It rests, is lifted, and has learned a pattern that looks like the patience it came from. The tray's surface is left to recover, and it always does. Upstairs, light enters a workroom through a lattice that edits the day into squares. A woodcarver leans over a plank of walnut destined to become a cabinet door. His tools lie to his right in a cloth roll. Gouge, veiner, V-tool, skew chisel. Their edges are sharp enough that they refuse to be joked with. He marks a border with a divider's walk, then cuts the first line as if he were saying a thing he has said before and still means. Leaves turn along the frame. A small rosette learns to be in the corner without crowding it. He sneezes once and laughs softly. The wood forgives him. Beside him, the inlayer in mother of pearl and bone sets the smallest pieces with tweezers that remember birds. He dips a sliver into glue as clear as a whispered promise and lays it into a bed cut for it alone. The pattern is not loud. It is a geometry that became polite long ago. Stars that do not brag, vines that do not wander. Between the white of shell and the warmth of walnut, a balance appears that will not shout from across the room, but will reward the hands that open and close the door every day for years. In the same house, a woman threads a needle with silk that behaves as if it were water when it's listening. She works a border on a cloth meant for a table, where bread and olives will be introduced to family. Her stitches follow a counted pattern learned from a neighbour's aunt. Each small X sits in its square, making larger shapes that only become obvious when she leans back. She hums a song with a tune from elsewhere and words from here. A child at her feet plays with a ball of twine that is allowed to become a cat for the afternoon and a bundle again before supper. Evening brings candles as a theory and oil lamps as a law. Wicks are trimmed with a knife that respects thin work. Lamps are filled with oil that grew in the next valley and learned virtues from a press older than your great-grandfather. A hand sets one lamp near the loom, another near the chest, a third on the stair to remember knees. Shadows accept their assignments and remain on their side of the bargain. The courtyard pool gives back a small moon to anyone who has a moment to look. Supper is factual and good. Bread torn and dipped in a stew, whose recipe accommodates whatever the garden thought wise today. Cucumber sliced to be cool. Yogurt stirred with a little salt until it learns coherence again. Mint leaves that a child tore, and a grandmother blessed with her eyes alone. Spoon handles tap the side of a bowl with a sound that never happens twice the same way. Talk is slow. Last year's flood is mentioned, only to measure how this year's gutter stones did their work. After supper, tools remember their homes. The loom's shuttle rests with its nose toward tomorrow. The dyer's paddle is rinsed and laid across the cauldron so its handle will not shrivel. The tinner's rag is folded with the clean part outside, and his bench is brushed into a dustpan that knows not to spill. The marbler skims the kiter with a strip of paper so tomorrow's pattern will not be confused by today's ghosts. The carver oils his chisels and wraps them. The inlayer closes his small boxes with a breath of satisfaction. The embroiderer knots her last thread, bites it clean, and lays the cloth flat between two sheets so the stitches will sleep in wrinkled. On the roof, a small line takes the laundry's weight and offers it back as a memory of sunlight. A jar sunk to its shoulder in a clay sleeve exchanges its heat with the air until both are pleased. A pair of sandals waits by the threshold, heels aligned as if they had agreed on a map. Cats settle. A neighbor's lute gets 3 sentences into a story and decides the ending is better kept for a better night. Someone pours hot water over tea leaves, and then over tired hands holding the cups. The night accepts the household into its ledger and leaves no debt. If sleep arrives, let it. Warps will keep their order wefts, will keep their crossings dies, will keep their pledge tins, will keep their shine papers, will keep their garden's chisels, will keep their edgy shells, will keep their stars stitches, will keep their squares lamps, will keep their trim poles, will keep a moon. Houses are workshops of agreement. Crafts are the city's way of remembering to be gentle when no one is watching. Pocket pictures to carry forward, a warp stretched across stone, the shuttle's nose peaking like a small boat's skeins rising from a copper pot. Steam spelling patience, tin finding copper and becoming pale as early milk, a marble tray with comb marks. Like quiet waves, a lattice window turning day into tidy rectangles, a gouge cutting a leaf that knows which way to curl. Mother of pearl star-laid with tweezers, a silk border of counted excess, a lamp wick trimmed to a clean oval, a jar sunk to its shoulder, learning coolness. If sleep arrives, let it. The household and its crafts will keep your place among looms and lamps, trays and tools, so that morning can borrow habits already willing to help. The 12th part. Time is a craft you can hold. In the mass courtyard, the first shade gathers under plane trees, and a shallow bowl of water on a low stand becomes a quiet mirror that marks the morning by how it stops shivering. On the south wall, a stone sundial keeps its dignified triangle. Its gnomon throws a blade of shadow that steps from one carved line to the next with the patience of a kindly teacher. The air is cool enough to make brass thoughtful. A small door off the arcade opens to the Muwokich room, the place where the city learns what hour it is without raising its voice. The timekeeper rolls a reed mat, sets a low table, and lays out instruments that have earned their right to be simple. An astrolabe rests on cloth, its reety a net of elegant curves that remembers distant stars. A wooden square, a plumb line, a compass of brass, a sandglass whose waist is narrow enough to persuade, not to scold. He fills a shallow cup with clean water, floats a small bowl with a pinhole in its belly, and watches it whisper time into the cup below. He notes the rate with 2 finger taps against the table, not to be heard, only to be felt. Before the first call is sung, a muezzin tests the stair to the minaret gallery. Placing his feet the way an experienced sailor places hands on a rope, each step a familiar knot. The gallery greets him with a waist-high rail that has learned both safety and modesty. He looks out. Roofs, a dome that holds the morning like a bowl holds a peach, smoke that has barely begun to remember cooking. He clears his throat, not as a performance, but as a courtesy to air. The words that will follow are not ours to write, only the care before them belongs here. In the room below, ink is ground to a small weather. The calligrapher has washed his hands until they forget everything but steadiness. A cake of soot and gum becomes a pool black enough to hold moonlight, a reed pen callum cut at an angle, or a small anvil of hon, dips and lifts. On burnished paper, lines of script appear like a path where no dust is raised, tall strokes that refuse hurry, rounded letters that never stumble. The pen is turned a fraction to make a new thickness the breath that guides it is quiet work, as if bellows in a glassmaker's shop had decided to pray. Books are made out of patience that has learned to sit down, sheets sized with starch except marbled end papers from yesterday's tray, the gardens of colour, now dry and obedient. A binder rounds a spine with a bone folder that knows how to persuade without leaving a scar. Sewing is done over to cords, kettle stitches fasten gatherings where gatherings prefer to part. A leather cover is cut with a long knife guided by a ruler's lip. A four-edged flap learns to be an embrace. Tools for blind tooling warm on a brass plate. They kiss the leather into patterns of stars and leaves that are content to be discovered slowly. On the mask's north side, a horizontal sundial shares the day with a vertical dial set on a buttress. Together they handle the seasons. The way to wise neighbors share chores. The muwakkit checks both, compares them with the bowl clock's whisper and the little sandglass that does not demand attention. A weight-driven wall clock in a wooden case counts the morning with a tick that is the size of a heartbeat at rest. It will not shout the hour, it will simply be there, a wooden agreement between gravity and escapement. Between prayers, the courtyard is a school of gentle tasks. A boy rinses brass candlesticks in a basin and dries them with a linen cloth that leaves no lint. A caretaker rubs a thin ribbon of oil along the door's hinge and works it until the hinge begins to believe in silence. A woman folds a shawl on a low bench, its edges meet, as if they were cousins long separated, now pleased to be together. A bucket of swept dust waits near a drain that knows where the city likes its small forgettings to go. The timekeeper steps into sun with the astrolabe hung from a cord. He cites the height of the day, sets the rule, and draws a conclusion as soft as a nod. He writes nothing on paper this time, he writes on the white chalk margin of the south arcade. A mark the size of a fingernail. It will be washed by rain, and that is as it should be. Beside him a mason repairs a joint with lime that smells like seashell memory. The trowel's handle is smooth where fingers have believed in it 4 decades. Across the street, a small clockmaker's shop borrows shade from a fig tree. On his bench, a mainspring is a tempered ribbon that prefers to coil and must be persuaded to share its strength. He breathes in when he opens a barrel, breathes out when he closes it somewhere. A dervish counts the same breath for other reasons. Pinions meet, wheels pivots find jewel holes burnished with a tiny stick and a charge of oil the size of a lentil. He sets a pendulum swinging very small, the kind of swing that believes more in frequency than in drama. At the library, light has been filtered through a wooden lattice until it knows how to be polite. Readers sit with their backs remembering chairs, pages turn the way a sail turns, enough to move, not enough to tear. Mojans accept the smallest notes, as thin as a promise whispered, so it will not disturb neighbors. A keeper slides a slip of paper into a book before it leaves the shelf. The slip carries only a mark and a date like late spring. Nothing that would nudge a mind awake at midnight. The book returns to its case when the day understands that reading can become tomorrow without loss. Late afternoon presses gold onto stone. The shadow on the sundial lengthens to the line that everyone in the courtyard has learned without looking. The one that means water should boil and then be poured. The one that suggests shutters can change their opinion and half close. A kettle takes that advice. Tea moves like a thought from the spout to thin cups. Sugar is agreed upon by nods alone. Somewhere, a scribe sands a page somewhere. A carpenter marks a plank with a knife instead of ink because ink would show off. Evening learns from oil and from habit. Wicks are trimmed to a precise oval, chimneys are wiped with cloth that never met soap, a match is drawn, not struck, and the first lamp believes in the next, and the next. On the minaret, the galleries would remember's feet, the rail's curve gathers the last heat of day, and gives it away in the dark. A bat chooses a line between two arches and keeps it. The weight in the clock case is wound with a key that knows its square. The click of ratchet teeth is counted in the head, not out loud. Night is a ledger of small consents. The courtyard pool returns the moon and accepts a leaf without issue. The chalk mark under the arcade does its quiet work until dew gives it a mercy. The astrolabe sleeps in its cloth. The sand glass lies on its side, so time will forgive it. The bowl clock is emptied and dried, because tomorrow deserves a dry bowl. The calligrapher caps his ink. The binder sets a book between boards. The clockmaker covers a movement with a bell jar that will keep dust from inventing ambitions. If sleep arrives, let it. Shadows will keep their steps. Bowls will keep their measures. Pens will keep their angles. Papers will keep their burnished spines, will keep their round hinges, will keep their hush wheels, will keep their tooth. Pendulums will keep their small swing lamps, will keep their oval of flame. Lattice will keep their squares. Time is a gentle carpenter, if you give it good tools and do not ask it to hurry. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A gnomon's blade touching a clean line, a bowl with a pinhole whispering seconds into water, an astrolabe's reedy like a garden of brass, a reed pen's cut against a horn anvil, a spine sewn over two chords, four-edged flap closing like a thoughtful hand, a weight inside a wooden clock case, listening to gravity, a hinge learning silence, from a ribbon of oil, a chalk fingernail on stone, a pendulum's half-centimeter swing, a bell jar covering a small heart of gears. If sleep arrives, let it. The mask and the clock will keep your place among shadows and bowls, pens and wheels, so that morning can inherit hours already arranged with kindness. The 13th part. Gardens are a city's way of remembering rain on days when the sky prefers to be thoughtful. At first ease of morning, a courtyard breathes the slow breath of watered earth. Pebbles settled into lime pads hold their chill and then give it up without complaint. A basin along the wall releases a thin thread of water that writes the same sentence over and over on its own surface. A fig leaf taps a tile and is forgiven. Somewhere, a door opens to a hinge that learned silence yesterday and continues to practice. Beyond the lane, the aqueduct keeps its promise in arches that do not need applause. Between hill and hill, it walks on stone legs, each pier a modest conclusion about weight and wind. A keeper climbs with his basket of tools, a brush for lime, a trowel for joints, a wooden dipper to listen where water runs inside the covered channel. He lifts a tile, looks for the small wrongness that starts as a whisper, finds a tuft of moss, smiles at ambition in the wrong place, removes it, sets the tile back, and smooths the seam with the gentleness of a baker fixing the edge of a loaf. In the quarter, where streets turn into one another as if remembering a childhood together, each street fountain offers its brass spout to a clay jug. The stone front is carved with leaves that do not insist on being a garden. A simple lintel holds a date no one argues with. A child brings a jug to the lip and hears the thin note that means the stream is honest today. The water is cool because of magic, but because stone keeps the night in its hands longer than the air does. A woman sets her palm under the spout and decides that herbs will not sulk at noon. Public water is a braid of courtesy. In a masked courtyard, the Adavana fountain with many lips gives each basin a turn. Brass taps are trimmed to drip only when asked. Towels hang where they remember to be clean. A boy learns to pour with his left and wash with his right, without needing to ask which is which. Under the canopy, the air is lighter, and the stones do not resent feet. The pool at the center keeps a portion of sky on behalf of those who cannot look up right now. Inside a house, a cellspill writes a thin, bright music along a grooved stone. Water is led to begin at a lip no wider than a thumb. It walks down a stair of ripples into a shallow basin and rests. The room grows cool by admitting the idea of a stream other than the body of one. On hot afternoons, the cellspill does most of the talking. The rest of the house agrees to listen. Windows are turned to have shutters, learn a V, that lets air pass, and like consider its manners a mat is sprinkled, where a nap will be invited. Beyond the wall where streets change their mind, and become edges of fields. A sakia turns once and then again. A wooden wheel with clay pots tied along its rim takes the field's thirst up from a well whose mouth is stone. A patient animal walks in a circle and thinks animal thoughts. A boy guides the line so it does not fret. The pots empty into a trough that chooses its path down a furrow. The furrow leads the water by the hand past olives and eggplants to tomatoes that will behave, as they are treated like respected cousins. The wheel creaks in a language that says work can be gentle if no one hurries it. Terraces step a hill down toward the sea in patient geometry. Dry laid walls keep soil from remembering gravity too fondly. On the stone face, rosemary smudges the air, and time thinks in low sentences. Vines sling their long elbows along wires. A man checks for mildew with the seriousness given to bread. When the breeze arrives from the water, someone winnows grain by pouring it from one bowl to another. The lighter bits taking the wine's advice, and the kernels falling where decisions are made. A gardener in the palace grounds holds a rake, if it were a light pen. The pebble bed at the edge of a rill, drawn into scallops and fans the pattern, does not boast it combs. Cypress stands like a promise that a line can be straight without being cruel. Plane trees lend a measured shade to a long canal where fish rehearse the idea of silver. A goose herder ushers his committee along a lawn that remembers dew. In the pavilion, shutters lattice the light into a polite chessboard that pieces are pleased to sit upon. Aqueduct water meets cisterns the way travellers accept a courtyard, with a nod and a wash. Underground rooms hold the day in stone barrels. Pillars do their remembering quietly. Arches turn load into conversation. A ladder knows how to be climbed without thinking about it. The keeper tests the level with a reed and listens to the note it makes against the wall. If the sound is higher than last week, he will tell the baker. If lower, he will tell the miller. The city's stomach and the city's throat share a ledger no one has to see. Bathhouses turn water into a grammar of kindness. In the cool room, voices fold themselves into towels. In the warm room, the air learns to hold steam without gossiping about it. A marble slab waits 4 hands that know how to persuade tired muscle to remember its better opinion. Water is lifted in a copper bowl and poured along a shoulder. The bowl speaks a small bell as it empties. Soap is worked into a lather with a mitt that refuses to scratch. In the hot room, one is important, and everyone is clean. When you step outside, the street smells like bread again. Gardens in courtyards keep hours, the way old books keep moderns. In late afternoon, a woman pinches basil and decides nobody will complain about too much mint. A child waters a pomegranate in a circle and learns to stop before puddles become promises the roots cannot keep. A cat walks the low wall and accepts a leaf to the ear as part of the day's contract. The sky tilts toward peach, then gold, then the thoughtful blue that lets lamps remember their part. Water knows how to sleep. At dusk the fountain at the square softens. People fill jugs with the seriousness of a ritual that needs no priest. The keeper closes the small door to the valve with a turn made by a rod that fits his hand, because he filed it that way. He counts without counting. That house near the oven, this shop with the copper pans, the old woman with the cracked jar who always receives a smile before water. He hangs a dipper on a nail, or on else uses, wipes the lip with a cloth that is washed as often as patience allows, and steps home through air that has decided to smell like figs. Night returns the world to its cisterns. On the aqueduct, arches wear the moon with the same indifference with which they wore noon. A breeze feels under the canopy of the eidervan and is content. The salspill trickles like writing in the margin of a page that will be read tomorrow. The sakia rests by leaning its buckets properly. In fields, channels darken into threads. Fireflies audition for candles and are forgiven when they forget their lines. In a garden, a rope ties a gate to a post with a loop that opens only when it is spoken to with respect. If sleep arrives, let it. Arches will keep their span spouts, will keep their clear lips. Rills will keep their level basins. will keep their cool wheels, will keep their circles terraces, will keep their walls cisterns, will keep their patience bowls, will keep their poor towels, will keep their softness shutters, will keep their squares. Water taught the city to be careful, and the city learned. Pocket pitchers to carry forward, a tile lifted, and a thin seam smoothed with lime, a brass spout threading water into a clay jug's cool darker cellspill's tiny staircase, catching light buckets rising from a wheel and turning the field into green persuasion, rosemary shadow on a terrace stone, system pillar wearing quiet like a robe, a copper bowl ringing, it pours along a shoulder, a rake drawing fans in pebbles, by a rill a keeper's reed reading the depth, the street fountain's dipper hung where night will remember it. If sleep arrives, let it. The gardens and their water will keep your place among arches and rills, basins and shade, so that morning can inherit a city already watered in thought and deed. The 14th part. Roads keep their promises by repeating small courtesies across long distances. At first light the highway outside the gate wears due like a memory of last night's kindness. Stones at the shoulder have learned to slope toward the ditch, so water doesn't sit and change its mind. Milestones squat without bragging, their tops are rubbed smooth by the same hands that check saddles and wheels. A plane tree at the first bend makes a circle of gentle air beneath it. A stone trough waits with a lip that invites a bucket and forgives clumsy mornings. In the yard of the menzil, the relay post, the day begins with hooves and rope, not with trumpets. A nalbant, the farrier, lifts a foreleg and tucks it into the crook of his knee. His hoof pick scrapes out yesterday's story stones, a thorn, a ribbon of dry mud, then his rasp writes a flatter paragraph. He shows a shoe to the light, checks its curve against the hoof, and warms it just enough to make it obedient, not angry. The tongs grip, the hammer taps, the nails go in shallow and angled. He clinches each, strokes the hoof, sets it down, and the horse tests the ground as if remembering an old friend. A groom shakes out a saddle pad and beats the dust that no one will miss. Wool is stuffed where bone might complain. The tree sits, the girth passes under with a calm swish. The knot is the kind that tightens without sulking and opens when asked. A currycomb travels a shoulder in neat ovals, mane hair is convinced, not conquered. A bell collar for the led camel is padded with felt, so the bell will breath rather than speak. Leather thongs are checked for cracks. A drop of oil persuades a buckle to be generous, and a rope halter is retired, so the knot knows which way to learn. At the weighing stone a steel yard keeps the peace between the left and the right. Sacks of figs, bales of wool, boxes of glassware enstraw the arm lifts. The slider walks, the pointer size toward level. Loads are paired like good neighbors on a beam, weight against weight, bulk against bulk, promise against promise. A scribe marks a tally on a stick, one notch long, one short, one that looks like a tree root, then pairs it with a twin that will travel. Each bundle earns a label of twine and a colored chip that means lower left or upper right when the morning is too full of talk. Wheels learn the day with a quiet roll. A cart's axle receives a handful of grease rubbed in with a rag that once was a shirt. The driver spins a spoke, listens for honesty, taps a wedge, rims sit tight, iron against wood, like a good rule against a lively page. A spare pin is tucked into the driver's hat band because pockets are for private lives, not for the road's needs. Yugs set a hand on a flank, says thanks in a language without verbs. The gate opens and the caravan arranges itself into a statement long enough for the day and short enough for kindness. Beyond the trees the road takes on its habits. In soft ground, cobble surface, as an argument settled years ago on hills. Terraces cut steps into slope so a wheel doesn't learn to run. Where a stream thinks across the way, a ford stone set just proud of the water invite hooves to step upstream. A small cutwater guides flow around a pier of the bridge the way a hand guides a child around a puddle. The bridge wears its arches like ribs. Each arch holds the one beside it up in a conversation that doesn't need adjectives. A totter courier arrives from the other way, horse slick with honest work, saddle small and high, bags tight to the tree. He changes mounts without stories. The postmaster signs with a gesture, flips one strap to his assistant, takes another from a hook, checks a seal's impression with a thumb, then shakes the courier's hand and points to water and hay. The courier drinks, the horse drinks, neither drinks until they forget themselves. In the stable shadow, a loaf meets a cheese into minutes. Both have agreed to be yesterday, no longer. Midday brings the square shelter of a caravanserai. The gate's arch is high enough to respect loads and low enough to teach pride to duck. Inside, a rectangular yard calls the heart arcades, save a lane of shade for those who understand shade. Troughs run along one side, the smith's corner ticks, the baker's oven keeps a slow promise. Packs drop to the ground with a sound like sleep. A water seller fills skins, tying their necks with a knot that opens by being pulled the right way. The keeper of the keys wears them on a ring like a portable bell. He gives one, takes one, and never lets the ring forget which is which. Rooms upstairs are statements of enough. Mats on raised platforms, a niche for a lamp, a nail for a robe, a window that edits wind into squares. In the corner, a clay jar is sunk to its shoulder and learns coolness all day. Its lid remembers dust. A traveller takes off his shoes with the care he gives to signing a contract and lines them heel to heel, as if they needed to tell each other something while he sleeps. He pours a cup, drinks half, pours a second cup, and leaves it for later, as if leaving bread for tomorrow's birds. Afternoon returns everyone to their tools. A saddle stitch is restitched where a cancel complains. A girth strap learns a new hole. A cobbler taps a hobnail on a bench and gives it a new life in a heel that will walk out of 2 summers. The farrier checks one hind hoof for heat, finds none, moves on. A ledger is consulted, but not to scold, only to remember who owes flour and who owes a favour. A map hangs in the office. Without rivers, named lines show distance between posts by the time a steady horse prefers, not by the fever of a storyteller. The road wakes again toward evening, when light leans long enough to teach shadows good manners. A rope ferry at a wide crossing glides, like a sentence finished before the word that would have made it clever. The rope hums like a low song men push with poles, and let the current do what it wants most, be useful without boasting. On the far bank, a stone landing wears grooves from 1,000 obedient keels. A boy jumps across the last little water, because jumping is still a language his knees like to speak. Night belongs to lamps that know their business. Tin lanterns with pinholes scatter quiet stars on the roads. Dust oil wicks trimmed to an oval make faces look like they remember kindness. A watchman at the post counts not people but breaths. His, the dog's, the horse's 3 rhythms that braid into a rope. He sets his bell on a beam, where it will be heard by those who need to hear it, and not by anyone else. On the horizon, a hilltop beacon smoulders rather than burns, in case fog needs an opinion more than an announcement. If a wheel breaks, the road has its answer. A jack made of 2 boards and a wedge persuades the axle to share its weight for a minute. A spare spoke, shaved with a knife, learns the round and joins the family. A rawhide thong pulls tight and dries tighter. A driver rubs his palm, smiles at the way wood, leather, and stubbornness conspire to make a circle again. No one calls it a miracle. Morning will call it a road. Camp is a dictionary of agreements. Tents rise because pegs know where stones are not. Ropes are set leeward, so wind has less to gossip about. A small trench accepts what rain has to say if rain visits, and if not, the trench becomes a story about forethought no one minds hearing twice. A pot sits on 3 stones. Lentils learn generosity. Tea warms and admits 2 leaves to be many. Animals face the way they prefer. A line of bells pulses like the heartbeat of a well-fed idea. Night walks around the camp once and nods. If sleep arrives, let it. Hooves will keep their shoe straps, will keep their holes. Steel yards will keep their level bridges, will keep their arches. Fairies will keep their rope posts, will keep their lamps. Keys will keep their ring jars, will keep their cool ledgers, will keep their temper maps, will keep their distances by kindness, not by fear. Roads are long because small tools are faithful, and distance is mostly patience measured out in steps. Pocket pitchers to carry forward, a hoof rasp drawing tidy sparks. A girth knot that opens with one polite pull. A steel yard's pointer settling a wedge, lifting an axle, just enough a rope ferry humming a bridge's cutwater parting. Small stubbornness of current, a bell collar padded to breathe, a key ring heavy with promises, a jar sunk to its shoulder in a room that edits wind, a lantern pricking soft stars onto dust. If sleep arrives, let it. The road and the post will keep your place among hooves and wheels, keys and ropes, so that morning can inherit miles, already willing to be gentle.